So yeah, we're kind of getting, we're looking to get it done, but not necessarily like, yeah.
This creates more work.
That's what it's called. Well, maybe not.
In a position where if somebody's opposed, they think you've got discretion to the time, and you don't.
We need to be able to just wear the badge of seal of approval.
What'd you say?
We need to, if it's a special use permit,
Then you get to put things on it that they
that's
get.
right, and if they don't adhere to the Halation Guild, which is a permit, about a 90-day, 120-day process.
Ask that to David. Ask that to David. I don't see the applicant here, which is unusual, but maybe he is and I don't. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Town of Wendell Board of Commissioners. Pleased to have all of you here tonight. We have a nice full house. That's always wonderful. Our Pledge of Allegiance tonight, we're going to be led by Fernando Ramirez. Fernando, if you can come to the microphone. And while he's doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. Fernando is a fourth grader at Lake Myra Elementary School. He's the little brother of Sandra, who we're going to meet in a few minutes. He used to be by her side every day, very shy, and I just had to drag him away to take a picture, so he's coming along. But he's grown into a very independent young man. He works very hard on his schoolwork and always is a good friend to others. He's the kind of kid that always does the right thing and knows what that is all on his own. Fernando is always polite and kind to anyone he interacts with in his classroom, in the hallways, and on the playground. He's always willing to help out, and we're honored to have him at Lake Myra Elementary School and be part of his family and the rest of his family. So we wanted to recognize you tonight, Fernando. We're very proud of all your work at school. And he's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
That's it.
Go.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Y'all can have a seat. Thank you so much. Our invocation by the Wendell Council of Churches. Tonight we're going to hear from Wendell Christian Church, George Fuller. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for being with us.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here from Wendell Christian Church. I'm the minister there. Only one thing I could think of that's coming up soon, on June 23rd, we're having a series of classes we invite everyone, the public, to about spiritual disciplines, ways to develop and enhance your own prayer life. And on the 23rd, we're going to talk about discernment, how in your own prayer life to discern the will of God for yourself. And I think enough of us have people telling us what to do. We might want to learn how to discern something bigger and better in our own prayer life. So that's one thing. And you can call our church and sign up. We'll feed you lunch. We're having it at 12:30, so anybody who goes to another church can come and join us, because we all need to figure that out together.
Thank you for the invitation.
Glad to be here. Yeah, well, let's pray. Lord, I'd like to begin by just lifting up each person that serves on the commission. I just thank you so much for their willingness to serve you in this capacity. I pray that you'd be with each of them in the depths of their own soul, so that they would know securely that your love for them, that they would know that you care for them, that you would meet their needs and the needs of their families, so that they could not be so caught up in what's going on in their own individual lives that they miss their calling that they've accepted here to do what their heart desires and deciding the best for our community, so that we can coordinate all the services and the programs and the policies that are being directed by this group, so that our community might let everybody in the community know that they matter, that we care for them, and they can know their place, so that we can work together to heal the people in our community that are hurting, to reduce the suffering, and also to better be able to produce the kind of community where we all love one another and serve one another and fulfill the very pledge that we just pledged together. And so I ask that you would be in these meetings, and even when there's necessary tension, as we all bring our own agendas, our own desires, our own versions of how things ought to be, in the midst of that tension, remind one another of loving one another and of working together so that we can create the best future we can even while we struggle to improve how we live our lives individually and together. Thank you again for their service, for the service of all those they direct, for the great sacrifices made, and for the ways in which they attend to us as the people they serve and lead. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Do we have an adjustment to the agenda?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make an adjustment to the agenda. If we can add an item to discuss downtown parking on 3rd Street.
All right, we have a motion to approve the agenda with the adjustment of an addition item, and we'll make it item 6C to discuss downtown parking. I think it's 15 West, or 15 3rd Street. So, all in favor?
Aye.
We have no one signed up tonight for public comment. Have a motion with the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item 4A is recognition of Lake Myra Elementary School staff member Sandra Ramirez. Ms. Ramirez, if you can come to the podium. Sandra Ramirez is the older sister of the young man we just recognized and led us in the Pledge of Allegiance. She's worked as the face of Lake Myra Elementary School for the last 3.5 years as the front desk receptionist. Sandra is fluent in 2 languages and supports students and families throughout the school community. She's been a great resource to help build strong relationships and trust with her Hispanic families at Lake Myra Elementary School. She's demonstrated resilience through difficult times and always maintains a positive attitude. She wears many hats and juggles many balls during the day, answering phones, wiping tears, applying Band-Aids, taping blown-out flip-flops, calling for lunch money, or providing a hug to a student in need. So you do wear a lot of hats, I can see that. She's been a huge asset to our school and community, and we are grateful for her every day. So you are certainly loved at Lake Myra Elementary School, and we just wanted to have you here tonight and thank you for everything you do for the kids in Wendell at Lake Myra Elementary School.
Thank you, it's an honor.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Item 4B is the Government Finance Officers Association Finance Recognition, Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, and we're going to hear from Garrett Johnson.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the board. I'm back from my annual appearance. Happy to report that the town of Wendell received the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for the fiscal year ended 2018. We are pretty much a whole year removed from all that work that we have done. It was a lot of hurry up and wait, but again, we're glad that we received the award for the 3rd consecutive year. So just a background, you've heard it before, but for those in the crowd who have not, as I said, we have been awarded it for the 3rd year. We first submitted in 2016. The CAFR is a voluntary document that we've put together, and it represents above and beyond financial and non-financial reporting. The report is made up of 4 sections. An introductory section that basically lays out the groundwork, how it's made up. The MD&A, which is Manager's Discussion and Analysis of the town, is followed by financial and statistical information that is put together. It is primarily comprised of audited numbers, and there is a 4th optional section, which is compliance and single audit. We do participate in that section as well. So as I said, it's a hurry up and wait. We have 6 months to put the document together, and then we just waited another 5 to hear back. So we're about to start up again, and looking forward to hopefully being awarded for a 4th year. The document is put together by the Finance Department, our Finance Director, Butch Kay, who is here, myself, our Human Resources Specialist, Malia Edwards, and our Accounting Technician, Elizabeth Jones. But this document's also, a lot of information is pulled from all the departments, so it's a full town-wide effort to get this submitted and receive the award. So I believe that basically sums it up. Again, thank you for having me. We're glad we received this award.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you.
We sure appreciate the hard work of you and Butch and Malia and Elizabeth and all the other town employees. Thank y'all. Item 4C is the presentation of the Wendell, North Carolina Report of Economic Assessment, prepared by the North Carolina Main Street and Rural Planning Center.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. As stated, we're here to receive a presentation by Bruce Naglin with NC Commerce regarding some work that he's been kind of spearheading for us and facilitating for the town of Wendell in developing an economic development assessment for the town. We're receiving a lot of growth right now, but so far it's more residential focused. We're starting to see that turn, and so we thought this would be an opportune time to have somebody come in, facilitate a discussion, public input, engagement sessions in order to determine how can we best leverage our assets, our strengths, how can we be aware of what limitations are there and address them in order to kind of drive our economic development in the most precise way that we want to in order to create that desired future with more commercial, more office, more manufacturing, and a more ideal place-making within our core. Bruce Naglin, we had come off a session with him or with NC Commerce in our downtown revitalization, and we were able to bring him in to lead this effort, and he helped put together a draft report. So I'll hand it over to him to kind of tell you the details of process he went through and the results that were generated in terms of vision statements and implementation plans and so forth. So Bruce, come on up, and I'll bring up your presentation.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ms. Mayor and Commissioners. I appreciate seeing you again, and this is fun. I'm excited about it. This is the culmination of several months of discussions and meetings and public engagements and all that. Number of folks who are here tonight. If you could, if I may,
yes.
Anybody who participated in any aspect of this report, would you stand for just a moment? Just a quick. Good. There were over, I'll tell you in a minute, but there's over 70 people really worked on this thing or participated in the process of this over the past several months, so since February. But anyway, let's get on with it. I'm going to try to, as I told the mayor in an email earlier today, that I will be brief but thorough as I can be anyway. But the process began basically, the town's experiencing significant changes, as I don't have to tell anybody, through residential development, business expansions, construction. And one of the goals is for the town is to examine how to leverage those attributes and strengths to address the challenges of growth. And this economic development assessment is one of them. We did a economic positioning and vision statement process, and also used some of the economic strategic plan that the town already has. Used some demographic and market data as well to get to where we were. And then we started with some community engagement sessions. We had 4 altogether, and the first one was on February 5th. It really was the local work group engagement. That's the one that really gave us the bulk of the background information of town. And it was a half day at the community center, so that everybody gave up work or play or whatever they were doing, and spent really a half day or more with us going through a lot of different things. We went through a lot of different things like a SWOT analysis, and we'll talk about that later on, identify community assets, and all those things. Then the second engagement was the community-wide economic positioning and vision forum. Met right here, and it was about 2.5 hours. It was open to the public at large. We had about 25 citizens, business, and property owners that attended and participated, I should say, not just attended. We made them work for those 2.5 hours. And ultimately, at the end of the night, we had enough of our own vision statements. We had, I think, 4 or 5 separate vision statements that we ultimately put together into one, which I'll show you right now. And that is, this is the proposed statement, I guess. Wendell is a thriving hub of commerce, industry, and recreation. Located just minutes from the state capitol, Wendell offers a small-town feel to residents with direct interstate access to commercial and industrial corporations. Our historic downtown is a center of diverse locally owned shopping, art, dining, and nightlife. Wendell's inclusive communities provide diverse housing, amenities, and civic engagement for all residents. A little bit later on, I'll tell you why certain phrases are underlined and all that, what that leads to. Our third engagement was the downtown stakeholder engagement. Met for 2 hours or so at Grill Billy's classroom. We had about 35 business and property owners, investors, and others who are interested in downtown issues, and we talked about all those things, found out what the issues were, concerns, attributes, and challenges. And we also reviewed a land use or the land use chart in downtown mixed use district list, DMX, and a little bit later on you'll see some potential suggestions for that as well. And then our final public engagement was on March 5th with the Wendell Falls Parkway engagement. A couple hours again at the community center. We had about 20 property owners of large vacant parcels along Wendell Falls Parkway. It was a facilitated discussion. Again, talked about the area strengths, challenges, and opportunities, and importantly discussed potential tools and processes to address impediments to the appropriate development. And we'll look at those a little bit later as well. So again, we had 4 events, almost 70 people participated in the process, and although there might have been some dual or even triple participation, that 70 people were all unique individuals. That doesn't include any of the crossover or anything. So that's a really good indication of folks wanting to do some things in town. So some of the things that we did at the beginning with the local work group, and then others, we added some of that into here as well, but this is mostly from the work group. We talked about what are the community assets, and these are just the key ones. I think there's a bigger list in the report, a larger list. But I highlighted some of the things that I thought were really, all of them are important. They're all really good to have. I just want to say real quick, Wendell has a lot of stuff that a lot of towns do not have. And so you're really ahead of the curve on a lot of things. And that's what I highlighted were those things that were kind of more unique to Wendell than others. You have access to highways. You have not one, but you have 2 National Register historic districts, which is awesome. You have natural gas, or access to natural gas, which seems to be a rarity in some places. Wendell Falls is a real good indicator of things to come as well. And then you have industry. Coyote and Vichy, I can never pronounce that one. Vichy? Vichy. And there's more, but those are 2 of the larger ones. You also have Wendell Falls trails. People love trails. You have golf carts on the streets. That is cool. So and a little secret tip about downtown and town development: you got to make it cool, whatever it is, whatever you come up with, whatever you use in the economic positioning statement or whatever. Bottom line is, it's got to be cool if you want people to come to town. And one of the coolest things that you have is Oliver, the largest tobacco worm depiction in the world. So that's just, I think that is pretty cool. So anyway, our SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, these are just some of the highlighted ones. But the strengths are, you're here, you're welcoming business, you're open to business. You have affordable land, again, access to the interstate. You have a certified industrial site in town and adjacent. You have good leadership. You have proximity to Raleigh. You have natural gas again, water and sewer capacity. Again, the Wendell Falls subdivision. The wayfinding signage is really good too. Some of the opportunities, again, utilizing the highway access, highway signage, there's potential for that. Again, proximity to Raleigh, water capacity. And all of the weaknesses, I don't like the word, but it would be hard to get SWOT out of something else. But those are challenges, and I think all of those are things that are fixable or doable to improve, to correct, to work on. So, and I think that's all of them, right down to almost everything. And then there's certain things that we can't do anything about or much about, and those are the threats. We can't conduct the retail market. It's hard to manage housing cycles and all those kinds of things, and tariffs and construction costs, and then that state tier designation thing that, I don't know, there's some magician in Raleigh that puts that together. Anyway, so that's the SWOT analysis. Downtown. What we found out during the engagement for downtown was that there's a strong love for downtown Wendell. There's a passion to succeed in downtown. But there's mixed messaging about what is the downtown district and how do we identify that and how do we kind of message that and how to move forward to achieve those desired changes. What do we have to do for downtown? That's what I mean from the business owners, property owners, those kinds of things. They want to move. They want to not move. They want to do things, get things going. So in our little downtown mini SWAT that we did that night, again, some of the strengths: golf cart use, pedestrian friendly, dog friendly. Of course, all the events and all that. Downtown opportunities. I thought this is a good one. I think you just had something on the agenda for tonight to identify parking or about parking. But a good idea would be to identify those formalized parking spaces. Where can people park? And maybe establish a parking plan. You don't need to spend $30,000, $40,000 or $20,000 on a plan. Just go out there, get an overhead, magic marker. Who owns the property? What can we do about it? All those kinds of things. The weaknesses in downtown or challenges, heard two things. One, rents are high for startup businesses. Also heard rents are too low to encourage owner investment. So it's sort of a chicken egg thing, and there are probably some ways, there are some ways to try to get that worked out somehow. Some of it has to do with expectation, and then the other just has to do with some programs that can probably be implemented down the road. Also, again, better definition, expanding the downtown boundaries is necessary. And then consistent streetscape and consistent lighting throughout. Whatever the downtown area is, you want it all to look the same or similar so that it's not changing out. And then the missing business types, those are just some of the things: seafood restaurants, sit-down restaurants, a sports bar, that kind of stuff. That'll all be manageable and figured out when you get to start doing recruitment and retention and all that. Again, some other the key downtown assets. The historic district. It feels genuine. The buildings are all compact. They're all kind of intact in one place. The architecture is really cool. There's some really neat stuff. The diversity of people and businesses. Again, there's a weather cam. I mean, that's kind of neat. And then the qualities, the unique qualities to Wendell. That's what we're really starting to try to push more, is to identify what's unique about our community. And there's several here. Again, that little tobacco worm guy, that's just very cool. The mural trail, and you're named after Oliver Wendell Holmes. I know that was sort of serendipitous, but that was kind of neat. And then I thought this was kind of cool too, and I did a little research, I guess, on Mr. George Lauer as well, who's helped develop that UPC code. He lives here in Wendell. He's old right now. He's very elderly, but he seems like a pretty nice guy from what I read. So I don't know. Anyway, these are things you want to try to work with, and when you're doing your promotion, when you're kind of identifying yourself more, creating new events, those kinds of things. Look at these kinds of things to help you come up with some ideas. And then the Downtown Mixed Use District, the DMX. And I do want to put a little caveat in here. We made a lot of changes in here, added some things. Most of these are from the night of the engagement when we talked with the downtown folks. And then also I looked at some, and just from my own background, 20 years in downtown development, looked at what types of things are really, could be permitted, are desirable to be permitted uses, what should maybe have some standards and special use. But what are the things in downtown? So these are some of the things, and this is kind of a list. The purple ones were sort of questionable about what they are and whether or not they should be in downtown. That's sort of a local determination to make. There is one thing, though, that I was looking at this again. I guess that doesn't go up there, does it? No, okay, it doesn't matter. Oh, no, that's too complicated for my little brain. So, but under permitted uses, it had general retail, 10,000 square feet or less. I had stricken the other one, it was 10,000 square feet or more, I think it was, or 15,000 square feet or more. But I would also have some reservation about any building, any use of a building that's 10,000 square feet in a downtown district, because that just takes up a chunk of space, I mean, for one use. And if it goes, then you're stuck with that one space. It's sort of the Walmart syndrome, you know, when they decide to move or whatever. You want really smaller parcel businesses and kind of thing, ideally, as you go around. Might be something on the outskirts of the downtown district, but that kind of thing. So anyway, with this whole list, the caveat that I have is that it's going to end up going through a public process anyway, once it goes, I think, if you decide to change it and all those things. So I think that there's just some scrutiny, and I would suggest looking at some other downtowns that you like and see what their permitted uses are and the types of things that they have. So then last one was the Wendell Falls Parkway Strategic Corridor. It's a key growth area. It's a connector from Wendell Falls, mixed-use community to downtown. We identified some development issues and came up with some potential solutions. Some of the strengths in that area are available land, development interests, opportunities, good land for quality prices, and felt like there was an opportunity for coordinated utility expansion. And all of these were from there. I'm just kind of highlighting a few of them. Some of the challenges were the UDO road requirements, and an outdated land use map and outdated zoning maps. So, but all of these were things that were some issues that night. So keep that going. And then these were some of the potential solutions. I didn't highlight any of them. They're all highlighted, basically. But that's for staff and you all to help try to wend your way through as time goes along. But to provide some potential funding for utility extensions for desirable projects, maybe some joint property and town easements for sewer, facilitated through a development agreement, system health, water line extensions, interest in proactive water. There was water and sewer easements, need for proactive conversation with Raleigh and DOT about infrastructure design issues, and appropriate, reasonable valuations of property to make it desirable and easier for developers to buy. That'd be a tough one. Possible assessment on developed lots to pay back utility extension costs and potential amendments to town infrastructure improvement requirements as development occurs. So it was very interesting, and I think it was a productive discussion from everything that I understood about the issues there. So now we come to all of that to get to this, which is what we call the Economic Development Assessment Implementation Plan. This is where we bring it all together, kind of a thing. So again, this is the Wendell Economic Positioning Vision. Take another look at it real quick, and then I won't suffer you through me reading it. I'm going to read it again anyway. Wendell is a thriving hub of commerce, industry, and recreation. Located just minutes from the state capitol, Wendell offers a small town feel to residents with direct interstate access to commercial and industrial corporations. Our historic downtown is the center of diverse locally owned shopping, art, dining, and nightlife. Wendell's inclusive communities provide diverse housing, amenities, and civic engagements for all residents. So all the phrases that are underlined are what we call sort of action goals. Those are the things that those are the things that we can act on and work toward. Those are sort of the vision things. So we came up with that, and through those action goals, came up with 4 strategies, and then some goals. Strategy 1, community connectivity. Strategy 2 is downtown development, business development, promotion and branding. And then we had 4 goals, one for each of the strategies at this point. Goal 1 is to create a town-wide sense of place. Goal 2, to create a successful and vibrant downtown district. Goal 3, to grow the local economy in Wendell. And Goal 4, which when I was putting this together, I realized I should have reworded it. It says there, make Wendell known statewide. And it should be make Wendell a household name. That's really what the goal should be. So, regardless, you want to get it known outside of eastern Wake County. So we start with the first one real quick. The town of Wendell boundaries are non-contiguous, making a sense of place difficult, especially for new businesses and residents in Martin Center, Wendell Falls, and Eagle Rock. So the first goal is to create a town-wide sense of place. The objective here is to create visual connections between downtown, Wendell Falls, Eagle Rock, and Martin Center. So I suggested that, you research some towns with similar disconnection characteristics, such as Fuquay, Varina, and Eden, North Carolina. The second one is to develop gathering spaces and activities and events throughout town where people from all the neighborhoods feel welcome. I'm not going to read all the actions, mostly just the objectives. But second objective, or continuing with the objective, it is the second one. Develop gathering spaces. Did I do that one? I did that one. Facilitate development opportunities along the Wendell Falls Parkway Strategic Corridor. And a lot of that is identified already in Section 5 of the assessment report as well. The things we just talked about in that list of 8 things earlier. Then the second strategy is downtown development. Downtown Wendell has a great-looking streetscape, historic buildings, legacy and new retail businesses, and a terrific sense of community. It's missing, however, an organizational structure, strategic goals, plans, and someone to help move that needle forward. What we suggest is developing a framework for a sustainable, nonprofit, tax-exempt downtown development organization based on successful downtown revitalization models, also known as Main Street. But there's ways to make those things work out pretty well and have a really good partnership and relationship with the town. Also, increase downtown retail and dining options. A lot easier said than done, but some of these can help with that. Certainly with creating the vibrant downtown. Maintain a building and business inventory. Speak with the property owners. Promote the town's facade grant program. And do some promotion and that kind of thing as well. And then facilitate the development of additional downtown gathering spaces and parking areas for special events, getting back to the cool factor for downtown and for the whole town. Also, create the best regulatory environment downtown for business strengthening and recruitment. Review ordinances and incorporate best practices for downtown district, including signage, parking, and design, and review and revise for the most appropriate and desired downtown or DMX land uses, as we talked about. The third strategy is business development. Again, there are several businesses and industrial companies that claim Wendell is a world headquarters with branches in other locations. Why? I think that's probably one of the answers that may help in developing a strategic recruitment plan with resources to help attract the right business and industry to the right sections of town. If you have a couple, you can get, and I think there's more than 2 or 3 here, you can certainly probably get more, but I would get them definitely involved in the conversation. Third objective is to increase the annual sales revenue of locally owned businesses and improve appearance of residential and commercial properties, not just downtown, but just even the residential sections, or I should say not just the commercial area, but also the residential areas as well. And there's some ideas on how to do Third one is to provide proper tools for staff in the community to make good decisions. And then provide information about available properties for commercial or residential development, available properties. The fourth and last strategy is promotion and branding. The branded wayfinding signs are a start, a very good start with connectivity and promotion of Wendell to the outside and people inside town. A series of existing events in downtown and Wendell Falls would also help keep and bring people into town. The town should build on these efforts with additional events and branding initiatives. One of the objectives is to engage in creative and unconventional or guerrilla marketing techniques. I would start with, if it were me, if someone had asked me, and you didn't, but I put it up there anyway, I would start with a video series, promotion series, on the proper pronunciation of Wendell. Because how many people, I'm sure there's more than just the two obvious ones, the correct one and the other one, but make it quirky, make it fun, make it hip, happening kind of a thing, you know, almost self-deprecating or whatever. But and do a series of events, videos like that about key events and activities in town. And then this other one, these are cheap things, relatively inexpensive. Identify places where visitors and residents are likely to take pictures, and just put the town logo and website, hashtag. I said hashtag only in Wendell NC, but where it's visible, so when the picture gets taken, you know, whoever's taking the picture is going to send that out, share the picture, but they're also going to share the logo and the town website, so they can get some more. You can get some more publicity and promotion that way. All town events should have the purpose of bringing people to town or downtown to generate retail foot traffic. I would suggest reviewing existing events to make sure they create foot traffic for businesses. If not, add event components with help of the merchants to create foot traffic. And then create a cross-promotion culture in downtown. Maybe in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, start monthly Wendell business owner, employee-only networking, so they can meet and learn about other businesses in downtown and throughout town, so that all the business people can start promoting. It's like, well, we don't have that right here, but if you go over there, you know, such and such has that at their shop. So again, the positioning, economic positioning and vision, and I would recommend, if you can, and if you decide you want to use this, is have that positioning statement on a lot of your documents, even on your agenda as you're coming through and making decisions. Because that's, you know, is this decision going to help us stay or become the hub of commerce, industry, and recreation? Is this decision going to still give us a small town feel? Is this decision going to still keep historic downtown as a center of diverse locally owned shopping, art, dining, and nightlife? Does this decision give us inclusive communities? Does this decision provide diverse housing, amenities, and civic engagement for all residents? And so that's just one of the ways to use that. It's probably the most effective way. And again, the goals. Will this goal create a townwide sense of place, create a successful, vibrant downtown district, grow the local economy, and will this get us well known? And so that's what that is. Hopefully some of these ideas and information are going to be helpful. I think the goal is to utilize this information into some of your other planning, economic development, and other planning documents. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to use some of this in all of that, and I hope you will. But it has been a pleasure to work on this and to meet you all and a lot of the town folks, and I'll be coming back too, just on my leisure time. But in the meantime, do you have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Any questions? Thank you so much. I've been waiting on pins and needles for this, so thank you.
Thank you.
It surpassed my expectations. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to move into our public hearings. Item number 5A is a zoning text amendment to sections 2.3, 3.3, and 19.3 of the UDO as it relates to indoor amusements, game rooms, and pool halls. We're going to hear from Mr. Bergmark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. I am a little under the weather, so if I have to pause and take a drink of water, please bear with me. As stated, this item, first public hearing item is to look at a text amendment to a few sections of the UDO in Chapter 2, 3, and 19 as it relates to indoor amusements. This was kind of spurred by someone looking at a game room establishment, but this applies to anybody who might be looking at any of these uses that would fall under the indoor amusement category. And as we looked at it, we also kind of folded in some material that was under the pool hall regulations under the Code of Ordinances. So tonight, we're asking the board to hold this public hearing, consider taking action on the text amendment. You have an attachment with the ordinance as it relates to indoor amusements, and also as it relates to removing some language to the Code of Ordinances. So if the board's prepared to do so, you could consider adopting that attached ordinance. This is being initiated by the town. Again, what staff's asking for this board to consider doing is to delete Chapter 6, Article 3, which is where current language exists in our Code of Ordinances for game rooms and pool halls in its entirety, and then add some language based on some of the standards from that to the UDO that cover indoor amusements. So right now, game rooms and pool halls are permitted in our zoning district in certain districts, by right in some cases with a special use in others. The problem is that we have this old language from the 80s within the Code of Ordinances in that Section 6 that's tied to privilege licenses, which we no longer can do privilege license taxes, and we no longer issue privilege licenses. So that language would at a minimum need to be reworked, if not outright removed. So under the UDO, the game rooms would be classified as a type of indoor amusement. What we're proposing is to add some additional supplemental standards to that use, to the indoor amusement use, to address any concerns there may be with that use. So some of the key questions are, where should we allow the indoor amusements to operate? What standards should be attached to them? And so what we looked at doing, currently they're allowed, permitted with additional standards in the corridor mixed use, community-centered, downtown mixed use, and highway commercial zoning districts. That's the only standard right now addresses outdoor PA systems, so it's related to noise, and that's it. There are no other standards attached to that use. So what we're looking to do is, again, amend 3 sections of the UDO, the definitions, standards, and then just the use table. And per the planning board's direction, what's currently proposed is to incorporate pool halls into the indoor amusement use. Right now, it's its own separate use, billiard pool hall, under the use table, but we're looking to just combine it with the other indoor uses. Additionally, the planning board was recommended requiring that a special use permit be required for an indoor amusement use in the downtown mixed use or DMX district. So again, in terms of the definitions, we modified the billiard pool hall in order to include that within the indoor amusement. We also looked to change the definition for the billiard pool hall, was amended to encompass establishments with more than 2. Previously, any place with even 1 pool table was a billiard room and required a special use and all the standards attached to it. And then finally, we added some supplemental standards for the indoor uses, or indoor amusements use, to address things like hours of operation, transparency requirements, and noise. So in terms of the definitions, again, we included billiard rooms, pool halls, modified the number of pool hall or tables that would kind of account for something being a billiard pool hall. And then within the standards, we had 3 main, I think it's 3, just 3, yeah, 3 main standards to address noise, to look at hours of operation, stating that they should be closed from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. Monday through Sunday, and to identify some appropriate standards for transparency. We wanted this to still be flexible enough that we're not saying that you can't have blinds of any type, but at the same time, we want to generally allow for when it's not in operation, it's open, you can see it for safety standards, or for safety reasons for police officers and the like, and fire department. So those are the three standards that would apply as supplemental standards. And additionally, we looked at making it require a special use permit within the DMX district. So that's just the use table showing which districts it would be allowed in and the changes we made. Billiard pool hall would go away entirely as its own standalone use. So the planning board at their May meeting voted 5-2 in favor of amending the definition, or the three sections we looked at: definitions, additional standards, and the use table, in order to create permitting standards for indoor amusements and pool halls. They referenced the statement of plan consistency, referencing principle number 5, which relates to promoting Wendell's attractiveness to businesses. Staff is in favor of this recommended changes, and we're looking to, I wanted to kind of summarize, I guess, some of the language that we originally had in there that we removed. There was language originally related more to things like background checks and the like that came from the Code of Ordinances. We reached out to the town attorney to see if that language could be carried across to the UDO supplemental standards, and we were essentially told that due to the authority, the regulatory authority that falls under development and zoning regulations, that wasn't something that could be moved across. So that's the reason why you don't kind of see that within these attached supplemental standards. We made some changes to the wording of the transparency requirements, amended the language related to noise to say that explicitly that it should comply with noise ordinance, made it a little more flexible in terms of those transparency standards to make it clear you can still have blinds or windows and require a special use in the DMX zoning district. And I believe that's all I have for now. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have, or if you want to receive input from the public as part of the public hearing first, whatever the board's preference.
All right. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. So, public hearing's open, and I guess the town is the applicant, so we don't hear from an applicant. So, do we have any citizens that would like to? You can, come up one at a time and state your name and your address. Keep an eye on the lights. You have 5 minutes, and I'll stop you.
Good evening, Regina Harmon, 6616 Tails Branch Road, own 2 businesses in downtown Wendell. As you know, the issue tonight is moving something from privilege license to special use. We used to have privilege license to where if you opened a business up, you kind of knew what was coming. You had rules and regulations with additional standards that would apply. Since this is an issue that it's being moved to special use, and the board gets to decide what those additional standards are, the town planning board did a good job listening to this for 2 different meetings, coming up with some additional standards to add in there. But what I'm hoping for is that since this is being moved to special use, and you already had a large amount of definition for additional standards through section 6.74 all the way to section 603, and the language in there, even 6-104, rules of operation, you already had a lot of language in there that really applied to this. Just some verbiage in there need to be changed from where it might state privilege license to changing it to special use. But these rules, basically David said that you're getting rid of all those tonight. And some of these rules, I hope that you will keep into play for the fact that it will protect the business owner for opening this business, and also protect the citizens and the community at large that surrounds this business. Some of this language, you know, it pertains to hours of operation, which of course we can change. It refers to basically things that can and can't be done as far as the type of blinds that you could have in there for the availability to see to the back of the building to make sure everything is being done properly, and also somebody working there during the hours that it's open, so it's just not open to the public to come and go as you please. That's a huge one in my opinion, you know, just for safety purposes, with a lot of children and family members coming to and from our town, walking in the downtown area. But most important, this language that you had in place for privilege license with additional standards, every single bit of that can just roll over to this with just a few minor changes with, putting the word special use under where it says privilege license, and it all is very adaptable. And then it allows the business owner to open, the business to come, and it also protects everybody else. So that's what I would ask for tonight, if you would just look at those rules, they were in front of you in your packet. Attachment A, item 5A, and look at those definitions and just roll that over. If there's, if you look at it, it really does apply to all of this. So thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Kathy Dara. I live at 3512 Coach Lantern. We have several businesses downtown. My main concern is, and the planning board did a great job, and they really did listen to us, and I really do appreciate that. And I appreciate that it's rolling into a special use. I had to come for a special use, and I think what a special use does is it puts some things in place that require us to be good neighbors. I think as a business owner, my responsibility is to the community. A game room has some propensity to maybe have some issues that some other businesses may not have. And I think by watering down to where there's almost none of the verbiage that used to be, which I believe it was set forth for a reason. Our society has not gotten better. In areas, it's actually gotten a little worse. So now's not a time to back up and water things down. So I think that we need to have, somebody 18 years or older needs to be on premise to supervise. I mean, I wouldn't open the coffee shop and just have it wide open with no supervision for people to come in and do what they want. So I think that that's an important thing for any business in downtown. And I also think that there needs to be some kind of wordage or verbiage to go with drugs or loitering, so that, again, if this young man does what he came and said he's going to do, fabulous. I have 4 children, and my kids are either in business or planning a business here in Wendell. So I am not against business, but I do think that as a community, we need to be careful that our business reflects a certain consideration to the community and to the surrounding businesses. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Okay, public hearing's closed. Does anyone from the board have any questions, comments? Okay.
My first one, Ms. Dara mentioned a young man. Who are we talking about?
A gentleman.
Could you come forward?
Well, David, can you?
Yeah,
He's asking.
I can respond to that one. So the son of the owner of Bravo's Pizza, they've purchased property across the street that was Bellamar, and so with the intention of trying to do a game room there, at least that's what he stated, and so that's kind of what spurred this discussion and what caused us to look and see the old kind of the language from the Code of Ordinances that posed a problem, given that we had no privilege licenses anymore. So that's the young man that she's speaking to, the son of the, I believe his name was Reuben, the Bravo's Pizza owner.
Is that correct, Ms. Darren? Yes. Okay. David, can you, at the beginning of your presentation, I don't know if it was in the slide, but you said some concerns that this type of use would bring. Can you explain to me the concerns that this type of use would bring?
So it was more in identifying any standards that might need to address any issues. I mean, that's the whole purpose of supplemental standards, is if something might be more conducive to creating noise or might be conducive to creating glare or something like that, you might have a standard to address that, or might be conducive to having atypical hours of operation. So that's really what I was referring to and what we tried to kind of address in that. Now, I mean, citizens, mentioned a number of concerns, but I don't want to necessarily go into what may or may not be justified or unjustified concerns.
That's our job. So, number one there, public address or any audio system, I would have concerns with any audio system being included after public address because, well, one, Wine and Beer 101 would be in violation of that every Friday and Saturday night. With a PA system where they have bands come in, we would be in violation of it when we have events. And also, we just permitted something on Main Street not 2 weeks ago where we talked about sound and we talked about sound and we came back to, oh yeah, we have a sound ordinance, we should probably just use our noise ordinance as the enforcing component. Stick with me here, you'll catch a theme. Shall be closed from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. Is there other businesses that are open between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. that are worried about the traffic that this business was going to create? I'm trying to figure out why we decided to put a time frame on this particular use. It seems to me to be the one that would be least likely to be open. However, I can tell you the only time I went to arcades when I was of the age to go to arcades was youth group sleepovers, and they would open up the arcade for us from 1 in the morning until 4 in the morning, and we'd go in there, and the business owners loved it because they made twice as much money that day. We loved it because it was a controlled environment where they could put all the kids close to home playing video games. Not to mention a variety of other reasons why the market should dictate what the business hours are, not government. And then the transparency shall be maintained in windows along the front of businesses so that it's clear to the interior, maybe seen from the street. One, I'm not certain what we're trying to see from the outside to the inside. Two, I don't know how we would ever enforce that. And three, the fact that the government's going to give you the ability to use shades or blinds when it's bright outside, is the chief supposed to go by with like a window tint to see if it's bright enough outside? Like, it's just not enforceable. It's not going to be enforced. This started out of a spat. It's rolled up to something else. I'm all for making sure that we have good regulations, but this just doesn't look like good regulation to me. The fact that one of the reasonable statements in there is reasonable in this statement says it's attractive to business. Being attractive to business in my mind means allowing business to come here, buy a building, and then go about their business. Certainly not create this whole other layer of things. I'm happy to understand why 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. is gonna do something great. I haven't found it in my packet. I haven't heard it in comments. I haven't heard it in phone calls beforehand. The transparency thing, I can kind of understand. Just wanting, I would be the other end of that spectrum of like, we should keep things open as much as possible, but each business is going to have a different reason why they either open or close their blinds, and I'm not sure that they should have to sign a piece of paper swearing before they get into business when they're going to leave the blinds open and when they're not. I certainly appreciate the planning board's work on this, but it's still illegal to bounce a ball on Main Street on the sidewalk. That's in our code of ordinances. I talked to Chief about it. Like, can't do it. You can also be cited for spitting gum on the sidewalk. But the bouncing of the ball thing's a real thing. I thought it was humorous because it's not too far in our code of ordinances when I first got on the board that we got a whole section about billiard halls as if billiards were different. It may have been different in a different day. I assure you that unless it's downloading an app to play on their iPad, there's not like a group of 13-year-olds waiting around the corner for the pool hall to open up so they can come up with mischievous activities. Like, that's just not where it happens anymore. We're using antiquated rules and we're trying to copy and paste, and what we got was a copy and paste of antiquated rules into a new UDO. So that's generally where I'm at, David. If you can business hours was the question I was asking you before I rode off on the horse, that you're also not allowed to tie up on Main Street.
Yeah, so we started off from an area of a whole litany of rules that were in the Code of Ordinances, knew that we didn't want nor need, well, I shouldn't say that. Staff's opinion was we did not want or need that. The question was, is there some smaller list that can address concerns that were brought up? And that's kind of how we left with this. I will say that if you look at comparative analysis of other towns, you'll find some that have this just as a permitted use period and there's no standards attached to it. You'll also be able to find some that have some kind of standard, but it's not something where all the towns except us have a whole list of standards that you have to meet.
One more question for you. So under the proposed, because we're not, at least not yet, it's not a special use, but it would be. So I'm the applicant, I apply, special use permit comes to us. So these are our three standards, right?
To start with, now the board, as part of the review of the special use, could apply some additional condition, but yes.
Okay. But if they met all three of these standards, they would be well on their way to get approved.
Certainly, special uses have some use, but they don't offer the level of protection that people generally think they do because there's such a high level, high requirement for the town to be able to put additional standards or to try to turn anything down because it's all based on, evidence being presented as part of a quasi-judicial hearing.
So the special use permit, in my mind, and I think in talking to some others, gives us the appearance that we have, and I say we, I mean the board, has the ability to say yes or no. That's literally all we have is the ability to say yes or no, but a lot of times that's banked on the findings and the evidence presented to us. The special use permit would seem to back us into a position that on every single amusement park, but this is a broader statement about special use permits. We're just deciding facts of things that staff could have processed a lot quicker and a lot easier with probably a lot better bearing and understanding of the situation. So that's my gripe on that is just that I can assure you that if this process was in place, we would get a lot of phone calls about a permitted use. There would be a lot of things a lot of people wanted us to do, and then we'd get in here and the attorney would tell us, hey, all of those things that people told you you could do and all of those comments that you heard, I need you to wipe those from your mind and swear that none of them will interfere with your finding of the fact. And then I need you to it's a pointless procedure that makes some people feel good, or a process that's maybe also outdated.
I will back step up a little bit. You took what was a jungle of blue light laws, and I mean, it said they had to be closed on Sunday. I mean, there was just a litany of things in there, and you really weeded it down to, 2 or 3 things. With that said, I also think 2 or 3 of those things need to go. We don't regulate the business hours for anyone else, and I don't know how closing at 11 protects, families downtown, because families with young kids aren't downtown at midnight. And so that, I sort of don't understand the rationale for regulating business times anymore when they should be closed, than the one we had a few months ago when we talked about how, other places, they should be open. They need to be open during these hours. I didn't agree with that. I don't really agree with this either. The other thing about the windows, I don't know how you say you have to allow the, see through the windows, but you can have blinds and you can close the blinds. I don't know how you enforce that. And so, to me, that's one of those things like don't bounce the ball on the sidewalk that can be used to bash people over the head you don't like and can be ignored for people you do. And so that's sort of where I have a problem with those sort of things. The other thing, I 100% agree about the special use permit. You meet all the requirements, even for a special use permit, you're gonna get it. Yes, we can add in some other things, but they still have to be reasonable, and if they were reasonable requirements, we should be adding them now. We should say that all businesses should have to, you know, be beholden to those rules or whatever, so. But that's special uses overall is an argument for another day, but, while I am in favor of stripping out all the language about, you know, privilege licenses and all that stuff and moving it, I don't think we should be in the business of telling businesses when they should be closed or when they should be open. That's a decision that should be made by the businesses. The only one I can really think of that even makes any sense would be to require someone to be on premises at all times. I wouldn't want a place like a coin-operated place that had no one there and was just open 24 hours a day. I feel like that's an invitation to get your machines broken into, but you're not going to be in business long, I guess. So that was the only one that I even thought made sense, but overall, there's several in here that I just don't, either don't agree with or don't see the point of. That's all I got.
Commissioner Meyer?
Yes, so, the full-time employee was another issue I had. I think, we've all heard the rumors of what may go in that location, and even the citizens addressed it. So is that something, I guess, for our town attorney, is that something we can address in special use, or we should add into the UDO?
Well, let me say something maybe a little bit beyond that question. First of all, yes, you can. The thing that I think the staff was attempting to do here, based on our advice, was draw a distinction between those standards that apply to the person, the operator, and those standards that apply to the property.
Right.
The ones that apply to the property can be imposed as a part of the UDO. The ones that were connected to privilege license and applied to the person, for example, you couldn't get the license if you were a felon, et cetera. Those can't be a part of the UDO, because the permit actually is transferable. You grant the permit, but you're not granting it to the person per se, you're granting it for that specific property. And it can be transferred to any other person to operate the same use at that property. And I'll also add my 2 cents worth on special use permits. I've been doing this over 30 years, and I agree with your assessment about special use permits. They sort of set you up in the quasi-judicial process in a no-win situation. Either allow them or don't. I wouldn't recommend allowing them by special use.
So the other question I directed toward you as well, I spoke to David about it, and he didn't have a clear answer. And so anyway, I know you want to scrap the whole section 6, but there were sections 6-78, 6-79, 6-105 that I feel like should be addressed. They may not be geared toward the applicant, the person, but specifically the business. And we should look at rolling over a lot of that language under the amusements and indoor.
6-78, prohibited conduct.
That's right.
Jim, for clarification, most of those are state law.
Right. Yeah, these are going to be addressed by other provisions of law. They would not have to be included to be enforceable.
It's just like someone loitering outside.
So I guess what we should address is if there's criminal activity taking place in that business, the law would apply to that person, right? The charges would be applied to that person, not that business. So the town should still have the right to revoke, to withdraw that business's ability to stay in business if they're conducting criminal activity on the inside.
It wouldn't be a revocation of the land use permit. and you don't have the authority to grant a privilege license. What this language allowed you to do was revoke the privilege license based on conduct. But with a land use permit, you don't have that authority.
Because we don't have privilege licenses anymore, we don't have the recourse to.
So there's no protections for the town.
Well, the protections are in that, I think all of this list, with maybe the exception of employing, number 3, employing somebody in a supervisory capacity who's been convicted of unlawfully selling or possessing alcoholic beverages or drugs. These others would be addressed by other laws, these other 4 provisions. Gambling, disorderly conduct, consumption of alcohol, allowing persons to remain on the premises under the influence. Those are.
So if that activity, just for clarity, because I've received several calls on this, so if that activity is taking place in that business, the town has no authority to go in and shut down that business.
The police chief would address those issues.
In a criminal nature, but not revoking their
Not revoking their land use permit.
But yes.
Right.
So, any standards we put on there, if they are violated, it doesn't take away the permit, does the land use permit?
That's right.
That's what I think he's asking, and I
The way
want to make
I'm
sure everybody
understanding
understands.
it is what he's asking is if the employees, on an ongoing basis, I understand if you catch one employee selling weed out of the back, that he's gonna be arrested, go to jail, be gone. But if next week there's another employee and they're doing the same thing, and then a month later, at what point do we get to, do we go?
Recurring.
That's right.
That the place becomes a nuisance and not just the people.
And that's a whole nother section of law.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be just the employee.
I was just using that as an
Does that
example.
fall into nuisance properties? And
It does, but as a practical matter, the conduct has got to be so egregious to meet the public nuisance standard that it's really hard to get there.
Because, and I know we're not thinking of it in this very small window, but these same rules could and would, and in an ideal world, should be applied to everyone.
True.
So, if it was First Citizens Bank and they had 3 employees that were arrested month after month after month, maybe not for marijuana, but maybe for pills, and these rules were applied, well, are we gonna shut down First Citizens Bank? No, because there's separate portions of the law. They're on Main Street. If they get arrested 2 and 3 and 4 times, one, I can guarantee that Chief's probably gonna have a car parked in front and back. He will be enforcing the law that's already on the books. This is an antiquated set of provisions that are underneath a special use permit, which we haven't, or not special, privilege license, which we haven't had since I've been on the board. So like, we should have cut this out a while ago. And we're trying to set up a third rail of the law. Like, if you violate the law, the police enforce the law. If it's a zoning issue, the town planning department enforces it. When we try to commingle those two things, we get funny codes of ordinances like what we had here. Like, just letting them be in their separate lanes. The police will, like, look, and I'm sure loitering outside of an arcade for some will look different than loitering outside of a coffee shop or loitering outside of a wine and beer shop.
Well, no, I think, you know, I love the example of First Citizens, but I think with amusements, you know, if we're gonna have a section in our UDO for amusements, we have to have a little forethought on what may or may not happen in those establishments, because there's a level of expectation.
Or else they wouldn't be carved out in their own little section.
Right.
But I don't think these were originally carved out. I think it was pool tables that were carved out originally. And pool tables, yeah, like I remember signs, you can go to, there's one in where you don't put your dollar bills on the table because that's officially gambling. You gotta keep them in your pocket. Like, it's, you know, that ordinance should probably go to the same place with the one about where to tie your horse up. It's just not a thing that's gonna happen anytime in the near future. I'm fine with transferring things over. What I'd say is, trying to use the old codes of ordinances on a land use permit. One, I'd be quite upset if I was employing some 18-year-olds who are just apt to make dumb decisions. And I didn't make mine until I was 19 or 20, but in my business, the way my building was zoned got revoked over it, not to mention we don't have the authority to do it to begin with.
So I understand that, Section 6 specifics, most of it was dated, but I feel like, scrapping that, coming up with only, 3 regulations is a little,
Well, like, we aren't scrapping it, the General Assembly scrapped it for us.
understand, but amusements, we need to have a little more forethought as a town to what may happen in those establishments and have regulations on those establishments.
Do we have the ability to mandate a person be there?
I think you can do that as a zoning. We looked at that, and that's a supervised versus unsupervised, facilitated versus unfacilitated. I think you can do that on the zoning basis. But it's a closed question, I'll give you that.
I mean, I have no problem with someone requiring someone to be there. I think that if you think about it a little further, that probably takes care of your hours of operation too, because I'm only gonna pay for someone to be there when it's profitable for me to pay them to be there. But I think the sound standard should always be the town's noise ordinance, and I think the best way to get enforcement on the town's noise ordinance is to make that one standard across all of town that everyone knows and gets. The operating time, like I said, I'm not a fan of that. I'm happy to talk about a person being there because I see the caveat in my argument. If I say that you should be able to be open whenever you want, and then I don't require a person to be there, then the wheel can just keep turning, and I don't want to create that scenario, although I don't think it would happen. I'll give you that caveat, but that's where I'm at on this.
I would like to see someone there. That's kind of been the thing that got my attention. So I'd like to know from Mr. Cawley how you were talking about that a few minutes ago, and how to word that in a way that how to best implement that.
I think you would do it in the definitions of the use, and include that it's supervised.
Okay.
We didn't draft something for that, or
Okay, that'd be great. And also, you said a minute ago that you wouldn't recommend special use. What would you recommend? I'm sorry, a lot of pressure.
This is more personal observation.
Yeah, but I'm curious, because we did get off on that sidetrack.
I think I would either allow it in the zone or not.
So allow it by right?
Right.
Okay.
Or with additional standards.
Allow it by, okay.
Standards. But the special use requirement, I think, creates an expectation in the general public that you have an authority you don't have. Because if it meets the requirements, the law says you shall grant the permit.
Yeah. It's kind of putting us at a disadvantage more than an advantage, not an advantageous position.
That's my opinion.
Okay.
To clarify, it's currently allowed in DMX as a use with additional standards, so that would be no change from the current use table.
So we could leave it like it is right now and just discuss the standards, correct?
That's what I'm hearing from you, but Tim hasn't spoken yet, so I'm hesitant to say that.
Just we've kind of come down, but from this point, we could leave it like it is now and discuss the standards, and one of them might be in the definition to call it supervised.
That wouldn't be an additional standard, that would just be in the zoning definition.
Right.
So we just put that in the zoning definition, we wouldn't put it in it.
Supervised.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have to be an additional standard, it would be.
Right, okay, that's fine, yeah.
Right.
Did you have anything you wanted to say?
I did.
Mr. Lutz, okay.
Yeah.
I see you down there writing, and I can hear him kind of mumbling. So, go ahead.
There's trouble there. So I had just a couple questions for you, David. And I agree with, generally 99% of everything that was said so far, coming down the table here. So I would not veer from that plan of action at all. I had a couple of just questions about the outdoor public address. So my only thought, and I agree with what you just said, played by the town's noise ordinances, that would encompass things. I have been to tourist places where, you have someone on a microphone who is talking to people as they walk down the street, trying to get them to come in. It doesn't have to be very loud, but if you're at the building, it could be, what's that? It could be loud, it wouldn't have to be very loud, but it could be loud enough that it may not be out of the noise ordinance, but it could still fall under the outdoor public address. I don't know if that would still be a gray area at all, or if that would still be in conflict with the noise ordinance.
So, I mean, what you have currently listed is stricter than just the noise ordinances by itself. Although I will say the noise ordinance is fairly subjective. It kind of leaves a lot of subjectivity to the police department to determine what's too loud. That we generally don't have specific decibel levels set for everything, although we do have that for, you know, a specific use or two, like firing ranges. But this would go, I'd say, beyond what just the noise ordinance would by itself. I'll also say that it was never the intent that, like, you know, if you had music playing inside and while somebody opened the door, you could hear it, that you're going to go get a violation or anything along those lines. But yeah.
Right, I just wouldn't want this to be anything where someone was just, you know, I didn't mind the public address system, audio system, just because, to me, even if it wasn't very loud noise, but it was noise that was being projected outside the building, distract people, or if someone was, you know, I still wouldn't want that downtown. And that would be one thing that'd be my only thought, to keep that in there. I don't think that's hurting anything. The business hours, I would scrap that. I think I'm 100% agree with, if you put a staffed employee in there, no boss is going to pay that employee, you know, for time they didn't need to be there. I mean, that immediately puts some sort of time on there. No employee's going to want to work till, I mean they would, but, you know, at some point employees get tired and they want to go home, and at that point, I think that puts a good time on there. The building, the tent, the blinds, I can understand, somebody can make the argument for me, I can see where they'd be coming from. I know that's to keep transparency, but, yeah, I can understand if you had an arcade, you know, you get clear from lights and you put blinds down, and then I could also understand why, like you guys said, put it on every business then. And there's times when we'll buy the businesses and blinds are down, and the shades are down, and, I don't ever think, man, what's going on in there? I just assume that they're closed, or I'm not going in there, and that's kind of what it is.
And if there were no hours of operation attached to it, I don't know as much if you'd need that. I mean, certainly if there were hours of operation, being able to, during the non-daylight hours, nighttime hours, being able to see, would help you to be able to enforce that. If there is no hours of operation, that's somewhat less needed. Not that that's the only reason for that standard. And certainly you could, it's all kind of at the pleasure of the board, but I mean, you could strike out the or any audio system if you wanted to leave a public address, you know, no outdoor public address, you could leave that part and then eliminate the or any audio system. That would make it a little less strict. You're still prohibiting an outdoor PA that can be heard beyond the boundaries, but not just any noise that might otherwise be coming from the business.
I'm good with that. My only, any audio system concern for me was, I'm anticipating like a really cool arcade here. So when
you want to be able to hear that DDR.
When you hit the weight and it goes to the top and the bell rings because you're the only kid that day that got, you don't want to, and then you're just hitting a thing and there's no bell.
I mean, I think this gets taken on as people are nervous about the negative side of things. And I can understand that, but on the same point, I could see some good stuff with this too. I could see some, it's, you know, as a parent, I could see myself going across the street and getting dinner. My kids are too young for this now, but, you know, going over there and playing some video games, or, you know, ice cream. I could just see it being more than just a trouble spot for the town. So I don't want it to be a thing where we're putting these rules on business because that it might be something that develops into a problem for other business. I mean, that's something we can address. The police will address if it becomes a problem. And so I think I'd like to just see us go back and reword some of this, make it permitted by right, add in the employee or supervisor on staff during business hours, take out the audio system, strike the blinds, and then get another look at it and see how it looks.
Have we even talked to the owner to see if he has plans on supervision?
He was present at the planning board meeting. He didn't speak to that directly. I think it was his intention to generally have someone there, but I don't know that it was his intention to always have someone there.
Well, the great debate's been fun and all, but any business owner that's not supervising his business is not gonna be in business very long. So, to me, all of this is answered by a little bit of supervision and the free market.
Can we make a motion out of any of this, or?
I don't think we haven't closed let's close the public hearing. We kinda got out of order. Did I? Okay, we got out of order because the town was the applicant, so I was out of order. All right, well, what do y'all want to do then?
Well, my direction would be just simply that, David, I'll repeat it if you need me to, but, I'll get back to my spot here. On number one, I would strike audio systems. I would strike number two completely, strike number three completely, and then add in a clause about, some sort of employee or supervisor being, in the building present during business hours. And then, I'd say I'll let our attorney look over it and get it back to us for our next meeting for approval.
And not a special use permit.
And permitted by right.
By right or with additional, just to clarify, because we're putting additional requirements by right. Is that correct, that the permitted versus permitted with supplemental requirements?
So what I just heard is we still would have some form of number one, so it would still be permitted with additional standards, but not, yeah.
That'd be my thought.
Do you have everything you need, David?
Certainly, yeah, we can
Got it.
get that amended.
Okay, all right.
By consensus, Mayor? Was there a motion?
I'll get something in that form of motion, if it needs to
All
be.
right, does it need to be in the form of a motion? To
It
wait
might-
a week?
It might not hurt.
Wait 2 weeks, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, item 5B is a, public hearing on the zoning text amendment to sections 2.3, 3.3, and 19.3 of the UDO as it relates to short-term rentals, specifically bed and breakfast inns, homestays, and whole house lodging. Mr. Bergmark?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. Our second text amendment, you've been asked to hold a public hearing on this item as well, amending the same chapters. And you have an ordinance that could be adopted if the board is prepared to do so, attached to your report. We are the applicant in this case as well. This is something where the board directed the staff to look at these uses. We've had a lot of, we've had some more interest in Airbnbs and these short-term rentals. We don't have a whole lot in town, but it's something that, when it came to our attention, we realized we didn't have a use that really addressed them. We have something for bed and breakfasts, but nothing that adequately captures the other short-term rentals, whether it's the whole house or just part of the house that's being rented, that we're referring to as homestays and whole house lodging uses. So we've put together language for your consideration to address these uses. Some of the things we thought about when coming to these standards and regulations is just, how do these differ from your typical single-family home? Do we want to allow whole house lodging as an option or not? And where should we allow these, and what standards should we attach to these? As I stated, there's no current use in the UDO that really adequately captures short-term rentals other than bed and breakfasts. So when there's no standard to apply to it, it's effectively, or there's no standard in our use matrices, it's effectively prohibited. So we got direction that we definitely wanted to allow this in some form. We're proposing to revise existing bed and breakfast in use in the UDO, and as well as create two new types of short-term rentals, being homestays, meaning that someone is living there the whole time, but they may be renting out a room or two, versus whole house lodging, where someone's renting out their entire house. They may live there at times, but not while the person's renting it, or they may not live there at all. It might just be an investment property that they rent out, with standards attached to those. I did want to make it clear that this is all, when I refer to short-term rentals, it means 30 days or less. So nothing in here is affecting normal rental properties where you might be renting it for, 6 months, a year, or whatever it may be. This is just for these short-term, 30 days or less, rental uses. I mean, these are essentially more, where somebody's using this as an income property, in that way. I mentioned the bed and breakfast inn does currently exist, defined as a short-term lodging in a private home where breakfast is included as part of the room rate. Currently, we don't have any standards attached to it at all. As we looked at creating uses and standards for these other short-term rentals, we thought it was necessary to apply some standards to this, because currently, right now, anybody in any neighborhood could just suddenly basically use their home as a hotel, as long as they gave them breakfast of some type. So what we propose to do is incorporate language from the 2018 Residential Building Code. They had specific language for bed and breakfast homes, and this will also help differentiate it from the other lodging uses that were added. We did a comparative analysis of other jurisdictions to see what do they do in terms of any regulations or standards attached to these. Those could deal with just whether or not they allowed whole house rentals at all. Some places don't. Whether or not they have an annual registration. Based on our research, it appears to be legislation that would prohibit that, so we're not proposing to have annual registration for rental property. Whether or not there's any, in some cases they might have inspection requirements, they might have occupancy limits, how many people can stay there at once, and is there any kind of separation requirement between these uses. So some of the jurisdictions I mentioned do apply separation requirements. We were recommending applying a 400-foot separation requirement only in the residential districts that would apply to homestays and whole house lodging. So essentially, we're trying to be much more flexible for these uses that might be in more of the commercial districts along Wendell Boulevard or along our major roads, and apply a little bit more location requirements on those that are more in your just traditional subdivisions. And this helps reduce concentrations in those subdivisions. Not that that's an issue for us right now, but we're trying to address things that could be a future issue, and just thinking that these can have some different impacts. You don't necessarily want a whole cluster of them all in one subdivision, while being more flexible in their commercial areas. So what we're specifically proposing is to amend the definition for bed and breakfast inn. The changes that we added are underlined in your report and in the text, specifying how many. Again, this sounds like a lot of not more than 8 guest rooms. Again, that just came from the state building code for a period of less than 1 week. That came from the state building code for your bed and breakfast inns, in terms of what they consider a bed and breakfast home. They're not held to the same standards as some other lodging uses might be held under the building code. The other uses we're adding for homestay, again, that's a private resident occupied dwelling unit, so the resident lives there, they're renting out rooms, versus whole house lodging, they don't necessarily live there at all. Both of these are 30 days or less. Second is to amend our use code in 2.3 in terms of where they're allowed. In general, the whole house lodging would be limited to residential, agricultural, as well as primary commercial districts. So again, the whole house, if it's more commercial in nature, you're less concerned about how this might differentiate itself from just a traditional residential home in a subdivision. As well, if it's in a more rural setting, there's less concern about those kind of potential differences and impacts as well. Bed and breakfast inns and homestays would be permitted in more districts than the whole house lodging, but they'd have some of those location limitations, like I referenced the separation requirement, not for bed and breakfast, but for the others. You have before you just the use tables to show where these would be permitted. The homestays are pretty much being permitted in almost every district, permitted with standards, I should say, while the whole house lodging is shown as being, again, in the RA district and your non-R districts. Bed and breakfasts are also allowed in pretty much any district with standards. Some of those standards get to that this is something that's actually historic in nature. I mean, that's kind of what people think of for a bed and breakfast inn, that's located in some kind of, in a historic area, whether it's a National Register district or local historic district, or it's on the registry or something along those lines. Again, to kind of differentiate, why are you treating this differently than just another short-term rental, to try to be more accommodating for some old historic home that somebody wants to use for this purpose. So the standards that would apply to the bed and breakfast inn, that they're within a primarily residential zoning district, and those districts are specified. Again, they're in one of these historic designations, whether it's local historic district, historic landmark property, National Register, or of historic places, or any property located within the National Register or historic district. Our only bed and breakfast that we have is within the National Register district, so this would not adversely impact our only bed and breakfast that we have in town. And then, again, there's standards related to the period of use, number of guest rooms, that this can't just, you can't be, while you're, would be serving food to the person staying there, this is not a restaurant unless it's otherwise permitted as a restaurant. You can't just be opening this up to the general public unless you're going through that extra process to become a restaurant. And that staff is present during this. For the homestay, this is, again, where someone's living there, renting out a room. We're making an allowance for a small sign like we do for home occupancy uses. We're proposing to apply a 400-foot separation requirement to avoid concentrations within residential neighborhoods. And this just applies within residential districts, not when you get into your commercial districts. Some language specifying that, yes, somebody does have to live there, and there's language attached to what can they provide just to show that, yes, they're a full-time resident of that property. It looks like a lot, but it's really just, this is what you need to show that you actually live there. And then, frankly, some instructions on that they submit a commercial zoning compliance form to us. That's any business does that. Some language letting them know that they need to make sure that any other applicable laws they're adhering to. Again, that's just kind of more of a heads up to them, not something that we're really, that requirement's there whether we state that or not. But it's more giving them a heads up there may be other applicable laws. And then a standard that says that you can't have regular events, classes, or weddings, receptions, unless you're otherwise permitted as an event venue. We don't want someone to be looking at this and saying that they're a short-term rental, but for limited use, and then it's really more of an event venue for weddings and the like. We're not saying we don't want that, but there's separate regulations for it. Limiting to one homestay per parcel, again specifying the length of 30 days, and then limiting the number of guests to 3 adults per guest room, no more than 2 guest rooms. So you could have 2 guest rooms and 6 people that would fall under this homestay use. Again, if you're looking to do something beyond that, then you'd fall in kind of the next category, typically the whole house lodging, for someone that wants to be able to rent out more space. This would be allowed generally not allowed in your residential districts, with the exception of the RA, would be allowed in the commercial highway. Does not actually have as many standards because it's more limited in where you can do it. Similar language to events and responsibility to make sure you're complying with other laws. And then there's a standard in there that talks about being prohibited on the ground floor of any street-facing multi-tenant structure established for a non-residential use. This is really to try to make sure someone didn't take like a property on Main Street and just make it a whole house lodging use because we didn't put anything in there that would prevent that. So if it's if it's a downtown streetscape, or if it's not square or something along those lines, somebody couldn't just turn that into a whole house lodging. The planning board had a pretty adverse reaction to this, and they voted unanimously to allow all these by rights with no standards in all districts. Staff's not in support of that, but that is where the planning board went. I think they just thought it was too heavy-handed and had a pretty strong reaction in the opposite direction. We have included a statement of plan consistency that refers to principle number 1, which is about preserving that small town feel and historic character of the community. That's included as part of the ordinance. So obviously staff prepared this, so while we're open to any amendments the board may want, we are in support of this. It's not a big issue right now, but it could be something that could become an issue over time. We just think it's wise to go ahead and have some standards in place. I feel like I did a pretty good job kind of summarizing differences, so I won't go back through all this. That last section kind of just talks about the differences and why we applied one standard to one use versus the other. So I'll be happy to take any questions the board may have, or if you want to open up the public hearing.
If I can add just one simple clarification.
Oh, yes, I forgot that.
Yeah, in addition to that, but in residential districts, in your neighborhoods, your citizens are going to expect residential uses, not commercial. So one of these is set out to maintain a residential character. Those standards apply to that district. One is more that laissez-faire, open to commercial activity, free market. Those are in the commercial areas and main corridors, where that's more expected by people who live on the main street. It's a very rational staff response and requirements on this. Staff took this on because there are citizens that want to use this use in residential neighborhoods. Okay? So the sharing economy is going to happen, whether we're Wendell or we're Asheville or Myrtle Beach or we're a big city. It's just a reality of technology and the response of technology to the commercial industry. And what staff's trying to do is provide an initial step. What we didn't want to have happen is allow it by right in all districts and then create non-conforming uses that the town has to come back and respond to later. We'd rather start at this point and scale back to meet demand than to create an issue and have to live with the nonconformity in our neighborhoods. That's the general thing that staff is proposing here with this recommendation. Now, one thing did come up between planning board and now that staff wanted to address about what happens when you have more than one dwelling unit on one parcel. Is it a homestay, or is the person not there even though they're if it was a detached garage with an apartment, but the owner's still on the property, isn't that a homestay? So David, if you can address that.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation and for the, let me lead into that other item. Yes, as the manager said, one item that came up is how would essentially secondary dwellings be treated? What would they fall under? Would it be a homestay? Would it be a whole house rental? It's a little ambiguous right now. I would, if this were already existing language, I'd probably just make the interpretation that yes, that would fall under the homestay use, but better to go ahead and make that clear in the language itself. So I'd recommend adding a statement within the homestay definition, stating that the definition shall include secondary dwellings operating as a short-term rental within that homestay definition, just for clarity's sake, so there's no ambiguity to it moving forward.
All right. Open the public hearing. Does anyone like to speak? Yes, sir. What's your name and address?
My name is Jonathan Olson. I reside at 115 Maddox Street. I'm a member of your planning board, and I would define our action as rational and realistic and by no means adverse. It is the responsibility of government to balance the needs of the whole while not infringing upon the rights of the individual. It is the responsibility of government to ensure an environment of safety and prosperity in their sphere of authority while not imposing undue and unjust regulation upon the rights of their citizens and property owners. It is the responsibility of government to continually review their actions to ensure that these lines have not been crossed. The assumption by government that anything not expressly permitted by law, regulation, or ordinance is seen in the eyes of government as prohibited and illegal is fundamentally wrong and must be righted. Citizens expect fairness, equality, and consistency in the actions of their government and will not stand for anything less. In the words of Ronald Reagan, man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. In this time of growth in our community, planning and prudence is essential. However, doing so with any degree of disregards for the rights of the individual citizen or property owner are unacceptable. We have municipalities in our area that have chosen to disregard those rights. They are enacting ordinances that not only disregard those rights, they have done so with a fee structure requiring citizens to pay the price to exercise their liberties. Ordinances should be evaluated and acted as a solution to a documented and validated problem, and not a solution in search of a problem. Local discussions in Wendell regarding the establishment of ordinances regulating how one can use their personal private property as a short-term homestay or whole house lodging are a solution in search of a problem. These types of rentals provide a unique solution for many visiting or transitioning into our community as a permanent resident. We have ordinances on the books to address unreasonably loud, disturbing and unnecessary noise concerns in town. We have ordinances on the books that define and outline the enforcement of occupancies that are deemed to be a nuisance. The discussion and adoption of any policy by this board should focus on creating solutions to problems and not on solutions in search of a problem. And government should never operate under the premise that everything be deemed illegal unless the government permits its citizenry to exercise those rights. This is counter to the fundamental intent of our forefathers in preventing government infringement on the individual rights and liberties of American citizens and reeks of the monarchy that they escaped. I urge you to follow the direction of the planning board on this issue and stop the creation of solutions in search of problems. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else? All right. Public hearing is closed. Any other questions, comments from the board?
I have a few questions for David here. I just need a couple of definitions here. I'm still a little bit mixed on the difference between homestay and whole house lodging.
Sounds like just with a homestay, there's a full-time resident there. While the people are staying there, there's someone there staying there as well. The resident is, or the owner is there as well. That doesn't mean they can't run out to the store or anything like that, or go to work, but it does mean that they're kind of on a semi-supervisory level. It's not they're renting out the entire house versus whole house rental. There's no standard or requirement that they be there at all. They could just have a lock, electronic lock on the door. They send that code to somebody, and that person stays there, and they don't live there at all. So the whole house rental is kind of, I guess you'd say, further along the spectrum in terms of a business use, while the homestay is kind of a quasi-business use. They're still living there, that's still their home, but they're also using it to generate some profit and have kind of a side business.
So the whole house lodging is more along the lines of someone who has a secondary home or something like that they're renting out short-term basis. Is that correct?
Typically, now it could be someone that's this is their primary home, and they leave every summer for a month, and they rent it out during that period, something along those lines. But typically, it's probably more the former example.
Okay. And then the only question I had was just in your research or looking around, whenever I've used sites like this before, 30 days seemed like a long time. Is that a typical number for?
That was pretty much the standard across the board in terms of what's short term versus anything beyond that. Again, if you're renting your house out for 3 months to somebody, that's no longer short-term rental. It's not something where you're having, change over and who's staying there, and it's just a normal rental that's not subject to all these standards.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that's also, look at hotel motel taxes and what is considered a short-term occupancy subject to that use is the less than 30 day. Anything above that falls into a rental of property for residential use.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
So I'll just make a comment. I think the other towns you showed us for comparisons, they all have other options. Wendell, we have no hotels, no motels. As I said, when this come up before, I think the only reason it's before us tonight is because somebody called you and asked you what the town's policy was.
Can they legally operate? Right now, they cannot.
They cannot.
What's currently preventing them?
It's not in the use table. Uses that are not in the permitted use table by law are not allowed, but maybe the attorney can clarify more on how a zoning ordinance works.
Well, that was one person. How are we enforcing it? If it's illegal currently, how are we enforcing that?
Well, if they call us and let us know they're conducting an illegal activity, it lets us know where to go. Otherwise, we have plenty to do. We're not proactively looking.
Yes, I think, even if we pass this, it would be terribly hard to enforce. So I would agree with the planning board that it should be permitted by right.
I'll go a little bit opposite of you, David. I'm just from the standpoint that I feel like this deals with people's homes and properties, and I think, and while it's, I guess I'm talking about both sides of my mouth here, I think people's property, they can be very concerned about what happens in their area. And so I don't see this as a large problem, but I do think when something brand new to the town like this, I think having some sort of rules on it would be a better start for us.
But there's no clear path to enforce it.
Well,
So currently it's illegal and we're not enforcing it. If it's illegal now and we're not enforcing it, or there's just no clear path to enforce it.
Well,
It would likely be complaint driven, don't you think,
Right.
to enforcement? Just like
But I can tell you,
the tall grass around here, everybody has a fit about. That's your neighbors telling on you folks. It's complaint driven typically.
yeah, I can tell you in different types of impacts in different size and types of communities, different neighborhoods and economic classes within your community are gonna experience short-term rentals in different ways. If you're in a resort community, then it's impacting your business community. Here we do not have that yet, so it's seen as a positive, a means to add rooms. But if someone was just coming in to create a hotel, we would not be anxious, or it would not be allowed for them just to set that into the residential district. So you're dispersing the hotel rooms, the commercial use, throughout your residential districts. The same impacts that in a zoning ordinance that you would separate the commercial use from your residential uses through zoning would not be in place. So if you're at somebody's going to somebody's wedding in Wendell and you want to go on one of the sharing housing sites and get a room, you don't live in that neighborhood. You're not worried about whether or not the neighboring family is getting up at 5 a.m. to put their kid on a school bus. You're not worried about the things that you would normally worry about. You're acting like a hotel room, and that's the use that's happening. In dispersed moderation, maybe no big deal, but the concern is that if there's an increased use, or those uses happen, all the houses on one block, then that might create a change in a neighborhood that doesn't currently exist. All right, so these are some very minimal separation and type uses that would put that in place that are enforceable. If we start getting complaints about my neighbors renting their house all the time, if they haven't permitted, or that's not and they're not there, then that is enforceable through the town. We're able to respond to that complaint. If it's just permitted in every use, our response is permitted in your use district.
So do we have an idea of how many of these homes are being rented out?
No, and the industry's made it challenging for local governments to find out that.
I have a question. You said earlier, you made a statement about creating non-conforming properties. And so, I took that to mean that if there are some of these short-term rentals that are currently already being used, if we were to pass staff's recommendation, they would become non-conforming and would still be allowed to operate?
No, what I meant by that is that if you allow them as a use by right, as recommended by the planning board in all districts, and you create several that you start, a town board at some future date starts to receive concerns from, at the point the town goes and changes it to put requirements in, the pre-existing businesses would have an argument that they are a pre-existing non-conforming use and continue to operate. You may ask the attorney if I'm correct. That's the planner's layman principle on that, but
I agree with the planner on that.
all right.
Okay, so then my question becomes, right now, we don't allow them by right. So if we were to pass this, the ones in existence would not be afforded that same.
They'd be subject to some level of rules.
Okay, so, and I'm just spitballing here, but what you're saying is it's not a big issue right now. It could become a big issue. It could. Right now, the town simply doesn't have an opinion on it, and they sort of operate in a gray area. If we pass the planning board's recommendations, it would basically give the ones that are already operating legitimacy, and any ones that come into existence until the rules change, legitimacy, and they could basically stay no matter what happened. However, if we just did nothing, if it doesn't become a problem, we don't ever have to speak of this again. If it does become a problem, we could pass staff's plan. The ones that already exist don't have legitimacy, and we could deal with that problem when and if it becomes a problem without basically giving a free pass to the ones that already exist.
Yeah, very well. To clarify, a planning board is a policy-making body, much like yourself. Staff implements policy. So we provide a recommendation to avoid issues that we see comparatively across other jurisdictions and could potentially occur in ours. The value judgment here on whether do you allow the use as a use by right or place the additional, you're placing a value on something, that's a policy decision, and that's completely in your realm. So staff will move forward with whichever decision this body wants to do, no problem whatsoever. Y'all make the policy decision, okay? Don't worry about that. And the planning board gentleman eloquently stated the planning board's policy recommendation on that. It's not staff's role to tell you which value to make. That's your job. We're providing the professional recommendation based on other jurisdictions and impacts in those jurisdictions. But either one can work. It's whether you deal with a problem before or after in many cases.
I'm just trying to flow chart it out, because no matter what we do, it either becomes a problem in the future or it doesn't. And if we adopt planning board's recommendation to permit it by right, if we or another board at a later date decides to change that, all the ones that came before that precipitated the problem would still be allowed. We wouldn't be able to get rid of them. Whereas if we did nothing tonight, we could take staff's recommendation later, when and if it became a problem, and we could eliminate them. That's what I'm saying. I'm not talking about the value of it. I'm talking about the practicality of, if it does become a problem in the future, what we do right now has an impact on what we can do about the ones that are actually causing the problem.
Can I make a motion?
You eliminate the legal non-conforming uses.
Yes.
We don't even know how many's in town, so I still don't see how we can enforce really anything, but anyway.
There are a lot of laws on the books that can't be enforced.
I would love to make a motion. How about we table this for further discussion, or put it on the next agenda, or 2 agendas out, 4 weeks out?
Is there some
Or 4 months.
information you want?
Yeah, after Mr. Olson's speech, I'm now ready to go home and throw my tea in the harbor. And thank you for that, by the way. That's probably the best public hearing comments that I've heard since I've been on the board. With you being, in a position, it's obvious that you're passionate about it, so, that's what we want. People putting thought in it, gathering their thoughts, and whether we agree with it or not, doesn't matter. It's just, you're doing what we put you in the position to do, so we appreciate that. But yeah, so there is some additional information I would like to personally seek out myself.
Okay. Maybe what towns more situated similarly to Wendell are doing? a lot of the towns we referenced were a lot larger. Maybe, I don't know, that might be interesting to look at.
I can take a deeper look. I'm pretty sure the answer is most of them aren't addressing
They
it.
are addressing it, okay, so that's what directed you to where you went, okay. Well, that's interesting too.
Is that a motion?
Motion on the table?
Yeah, motion to table it for, 4 weeks. Is that correct statement of the motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, the last public hearing,
I was just gonna, I know we just motioned it for 4 weeks, but can we do a date uncertain until staff feels certain? You got the 4th of July coming up, you got a couple of other things coming up that staff may not wanna dive back in with.
I'm not sure that we really gave staff anything to look for. What are we gonna let them look for? You just want some time to think?
No, I personally want to do some more research on it.
The one thing about going too much longer that concerns me is I received the email from the citizen, and I feel like it's been going on and on and on. When did we get that? April, maybe? It's been a while. I feel like we need to be expedient in answering her. That would be my only, well.
We should have told her about the board meeting.
100 people doing it. Don't be on the, just
I know.
down.
But I mean, I don't wanna let it hang out there forever, because she was trying to,
I would say that she can currently operate based on it's been a long day. Commissioner Boyette, not Representative Boyette.
So-
She may wanna start operating now, and she may wanna wait till later.
So just to clarify, what staff heard is that in 2 meetings' time, we'll return with comparative analysis of what other communities our size and allow the commission time to
If-
do their own independent conversations.
yes, if there are any communities.
That's fine.
Okay.
We can
So
go.
let's do 4 weeks, that way we can answer her citizen. All right, last public hearing, item 5C, is a zoning text amendment to section 10.4 of the UDO as it relates to parking requirements.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. Our third text amendment public hearing is looking at minimum parking requirements. You do have an ordinance attached as to your report that could be adopted if you were prepared to do so. I think and hope this will be easier than the other 2 amendments. This relates to section 10.4, which is general parking requirements for setting minimums for new development. Purpose of the proposed changes is to align with municipal standards and industry needs. Currently, we have no max. Excuse me. I'm glad this one's shorter. We do have pervious requirements. They kick in at 150% or 200%. Can I get a relief, maybe? Yeah.
You need a
You know,
recess? Can you get smart
Or
one
no,
to it?
I'm gonna tag in.
Okay.
Oh, boy. Okay, so currently, the current standards say that once you exceed 150% of the impervious, then you have to move to pervious, but there's no max. Issues are that parking minimums that are too low will require some uses to provide pervious paving, which is costlier. Planning staff did a comparative analysis of other jurisdictions as well as market examples that have come to Wendell, and determined that our base standard was a little low and needed to be adjusted. The initial request dealt with a commercial, one particular kind of commercial or industrial use, but planning staff looked at all of them so that if we needed to adjust all of them, they would. And so staff's recommending to raise the parking space minimums for select categories. Okay.
There was a similar change made to the PUD document for Wendell Falls, just as reference. We're not copying those exactly, but there is some precedent. You have a table showing you the parking requirements for specific uses, including your report, as compared to other municipalities that I'll bring up in a moment. This change, again, as a manager said, was spurred by a specific developer seeking to create a significant office development, but had some issues with the parking ratios and the fact that it's going to kick them into pervious paving requirements that they did not believe should be necessary based on kind of what the industry standards were for office parking needs. So there you have the table showing our comparative analysis with Knightdale, Wake Forest, Arches Lodge, Chapel Hill, Fuquay Green, and Apex. So the way these typically work is there'll either be a set number of spaces per square feet, like 2 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet, or sometimes it might be based on seats for things like restaurants or theaters or things of that nature, or sometimes they vary. What we found when we looked at it was that Wendell's parking minimums are lower than any of the other municipalities for office service uses, as well as entertainment and recreation, and the second lowest for retail. For restaurants, we're on the lower end, and conversely, we actually had the highest parking requirement for theaters of those evaluated, so we did think that should probably be modified as well. So the proposed amendments look at 5 categories that we're looking to change it for. On the screen, you see those in blue to change office service uses from 2 parking spaces required per 1,000 to 3 parking spaces required per 1,000. For retail uses, to move the needle from 2 spaces to 3.33. For restaurants, from 1 space per 4 seats to 1.25 spaces per 4 seats. For entertainment and recreation, to go from 1 to 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And for theaters, to move it from 1 per 3 seats to 1 per 4 seats. These were the areas that just seemed to stand out the most in terms of our analysis and comparison of other municipalities. Again, this was driven mostly by the need to try to respond to the concerns expressed by the potential office development, but we thought if there were other items that seemed to really stand out, let's go ahead and try to address them. The planning board at their May meeting voted unanimously in favor of amending section 10.4 as kind of specified for those 5 categories to modify those minimums required to be more in line with other municipalities and more in line with the industry standards. I should also point out that, again, even if we say it's 3 spaces, that doesn't mean that if you have 4 spaces or 3 spaces per 1,000, doesn't mean if you're coming out at 4 spaces per 1,000 that you're kind of being subjected to any extra costs. It's not really until 150%. So you can get higher than what that minimum is. It's not until you get to 150% that any kind of negative impact in terms of infrastructure costs apply. We do have a statement of plan consistency that references principle number 5, again, that relates to Wendell's attractiveness to business. And we are in favor of this proposed request. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, let's go ahead and open the public hearing. If anybody would like to speak. What's your name and address?
Good evening. My name is Stephen Sanderson. I live at 105 Lake Drive in Wendell. If you'll go back 1 page, go again. If you'll show us what other towns have done, it's going to, okay. If you will, I'm not here tonight for this. Excuse me, let me start over. I'm a civil engineer. I do land development. I work in many municipalities, many counties, and have done multiple site plans over my 30-year career or 20-something year career. Parking is an issue anywhere that you are, or anywhere that you work, or anywhere that you want to build. However, the way that we are looking at approaching it here is setting a set number as a minimum. We have a number and we want to make it bigger. I recommend that if you look at Knightdale's and Wake Forest and Chapel Hills and whatnot, they have a range rather than a set number. And so if I am putting in an office And if I'm putting in my office, and I have 0 employees and I don't want any, and I want to go with the minimum number of parking spaces, I can build my office and put in 2, 3, 4, whatever the ordinance requires. If I am putting in a law office and I'm gonna have a secretary and I'm gonna have a paralegal and I'm gonna have, 2 associates and whatever, I can go to the upper range of it and put in 8 spaces for the same number of square foot in the property. I recommend against going with a strict number and going to a range, and if you want to use the number that we had before, where it be like from 1 to 2 now, or from 1.5 to 2.5 or whatever, rather than doing a specific thing, because then you allow flexibility in the design of the site plan, and it can be tailored for the person who's building it, and they're more likely to come if they're not having an undue burden of expense put on them for putting in something that they don't need. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just wanted to clarify one thing, and I should have explained that the ranges are listed because those, our parking ratios are broken into those specific categories: office, service, retail, restaurant. Some municipalities have more categories, so they might have multiple categories that are different types of office versus service, or even differentiations within office. So that's kind of how the ranges came about, because they had multiple categories that would fall under our broader office service use, just as explanation.
David, could you also clarify that we also have a range, that this is a minimum, and then there's the 150%, so there's a range to the max there. Someone can always offer less parking.
Well, I mean, it's still listed, so there is a range in terms. Yeah, these are still minimum, so there is in terms of if you want to provide more, it doesn't necessarily hurt you. If you're gonna try to provide less, then you would have to meet that minimum.
Anyone else? All right. Public hearing's closed. Any questions from you gentlemen? Commissioner Boyette?
I hope y'all didn't think this was gonna be an easy one, because I got a lot to say about this. We do have a range, and it runs from the minimum up to as many as you can fit on the property. There is no maximum. There's no maximum number of spaces you can put. And I would like to point out that parking lots attract cars. They attract traffic. That's what they attract. And they're not very attractive, at least not to me. The last time I went to Nightdale and went shopping, I went to several stores in one shopping center, and I had to drive between all of them because it's like the Sahara of asphalt in between the buildings. 2 years ago, I went to, I don't know why I did it, from my own judgment, but I went to Target on Black Friday. There were still open parking spaces. Still open parking spaces. It's ridiculous how much space is wasted on parking lots. And I've had this discussion with Mr. Bergmark before, and we've talked about it, and I've brought it up at several meetings before. I think if anything, we shouldn't have a minimum number of spaces. We should have a maximum number of spaces. If you look at Main Street could not be built under our current rules with the amount of parking that we require. And that's the part of town that everybody likes to go to. If every business on Main Street was separated by 12 or 14 parking spaces, no one would walk between businesses. No one would walk between businesses. Getting back to how this came before us to start with, I always have a problem whenever someone comes in and says that it's time sensitive. We're in a rush. You're in a rush. We're not in a rush. They came in, and what they want to do is they want to pave a parking lot. They want to put in more spaces, and they don't want to pay more money for it to be pervious parking. And so their solution, because they want to go over and above what we allow for just standard paving, their solution for their upper end problem is to bring up the minimum. That doesn't make any sense. That's like saying you're against child labor and your solution to fix it is declare all 6-year-olds adults. It doesn't make any sense. The other problem I have with it is, you know, it used to be you had to have a hurricane to wash out roads around here. 2 days ago, we had a thunderstorm come through and wash out at least half a dozen roads within 10 miles of here. Okay? Paving the world adds to stormwater runoff issues, which we already are you know, chasing down as fast as we can go. We had an issue on in between Lake Drive and Pine Street with stormwater runoff and having to go in there and fix, put in a bigger culverts and everything else. Paving over more, you know, grass, dirt, or even in lieu of having pervious paving only adds those issues. So what we're doing is we're telling a developer that they can pave their giant parking lot for cheaper. The cost is going to be borne by the taxpayers when all that water runs off and has to be, you know, dealt with in a stormwater system. Some of these increases in the minimums are as much as 66%. And that's just me flying through it. You know, last year in 2018, we got 20 more inches of rain than Seattle did. This is not Phoenix around here, and adding more pavement is not a good solution to the flooding and runoff problems that we're having. The other problem is when you increase the amount of minimum parking spaces you have, you're going to end up pushing development out of downtown. Like I said, you couldn't build Main Street as it sits with the amount of parking that the minimums that we require now. If you increase them further, there are lots that are near downtown you couldn't put a business on because you wouldn't have enough room to put parking spaces on them also. So you're just going to push development away from downtown also. Let's see, what else did I scroll over here? That's about it. I absolutely wholeheartedly disagree. It takes away the ability of a small business owner to say, I only need 2 or 3 parking spaces for my business, and telling them that now they have to have 6 or 8 parking spaces. You know, this is taking away the ability for the market to dictate what needs to be built, and it basically says that we want more parking lots. I do not want more parking lots, period. I would much rather have less parking lots and people be able to walk from here to there, or build parking lots that suit the size that the business owner thinks that they need to be. We don't have a maximum. This office that wants to come here, no one's telling them that they can't build a parking lot of infinite size and scale. This is done because they want to build it cheaper. I am wholeheartedly against that. If they want to put in a parking lot, you know, we often talk about it, that we want to require a nicer thing for Wendell. We want to require better things for Wendell. And this is something that, yes, it costs a little bit more, and, you know, that's the way nicer things are, but we're just going to turn down, we're just going to say, oh, okay, because you want more parking spaces, we'll just allow you to pave it over with black asphalt. I wholeheartedly disagree with this, and I'm absolutely not in favor of this.
All right. Anyone else? Comments?
I would say Commissioner Boyette is aiming the shotgun of aggression at one very small piece. I wish that I knew exactly which portion of this really needs to be approved in the bigger fix. However, it sounds to me like we're making movements towards updating and getting closer to where other communities aren't being competitive with those communities. I would offer that we could move forward on this tonight and then allow an ad hoc committee of Commissioner Boyette, Mr. Sanderson, myself, and whoever else would like to work on a better way of doing parking and impervious, because the impervious dates back to the nitrogen runoff standards that I got mad about a year ago. So like they're all interconnected, we can figure that out, but what I will say is I believe that this is the definition of 5 cent that could hold up $1. And certainly we'll have the ability to review their site plans before they come back. But this is a broader piece that will give them, is that within the realm of?
I was just gonna point out, if there was a desire to move forward with a portion of this, you could modify just the office service use and not the other uses.
David, sorry, Mayor. David, can you explain we kind of rushed through the staff report a little bit. Can you explain the comparative analysis and what the market is and the Wendell Falls PUD and its requirements and what's already been approved by the town in the past to address market demand? I'm trying to hear a balance between diversifying our land use is a priority, and encouraging business development with the stormwater concern, which is around the environmental policy. If you could, the commission could discuss that a little further to help staff with any future guidance on rewrites or changes.
Do you want me to start, or were you seeking additional?
But just point out what our new requirement is in comparison to where the market was on that.
Right, so for the, I mean, if you're looking at this chart where the others lie for office service uses, again, in some cases you have ranges, meaning they had kind of different breakdowns of different office service uses, but in Knightdale, theirs was closer to ours, although I will say that the same person who developed our code also developed Knightdale's code, so that makes sense. In that it was 2 to 2.5 for them, so that's closer to where we are right now. Wake Forest, it could be, depending on the type of office or service use, it could be anywhere from 2 to 4. Certain things like medical offices might require a different number than others, and we just don't have that level of differentiation in ours, but some do. In Archer's Lodge, it was just shy of 3 at 2.86 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. Chapel Hill, it was, again, kind of a range depending on the type of office service use, but the bottom was 2.86, and it went all the way up to almost 4.5, depending on the type of office or service use. Fuquay Varina is 2.5, so kind of halfway between where we are now at 2 and versus the 3 that we were proposing. And then Apex is a little over 3 1/3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet for office and service uses. I don't know if we want to focus more on that versus the other, but I did want to also say a couple things that in terms of runoff, of course, anything the runoff they're creating, they're still going to have to account for. Now, you could say that maybe is, they're going to have to capture that per our stormwater regulations. Often that's capturing it until after the storm event leaves and then releasing it, but it's not just that the parking lots are just going to be flowing into the streets based on the new development going forward under our stormwater regulations. One other possible way to address this outside of strictly affecting the minimums would be to impact when does pervious paving kick in as well. Right now, initially it starts kicking in at 150%, and then kicks in even harder at 200%. You could modify that standard so that it didn't kick in at all until 200%, without changing necessarily the minimums, while still allowing more parking before any kind of pervious paving requirement kicks in. So that's another option, but again, we did base this kind of on what others are doing. In addition to just pervious paving and more expense to developer, the other thing you have to think about is just providing an adequate number to provide that use. If there's not an adequate number for that use, it could mean that they're parking in what's supposed to be other businesses' parking spaces potentially. And I'm not a fan of a sea of parking either, so I don't want to give that impression. And then finally, you could have a use that right now they're there and they're in some doctor's office or whatever it may be, and they only have so many employees, but they're not going to be there forever. So that's part of the reason why the number of spaces is more based on the square footage, because your next user may have more employees than that, and I mean, I'll acknowledge it also could change uses potentially, so it's not surefire way of, addressing the future, but it gets a little bit along the way. In terms of Wendell Falls, I didn't specify exactly what we changed them to, but I had it in the report that, for Wendell Falls, when we went through the PUD process, part of their changes that we approved was to change the office service uses from 2 spaces, which is what we have, to 2.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Their retail was changed from 2, which is our current requirement, to 3.5, and their restaurants from 1 per 4 seats to 1.5 per 4 seats. So again, that was kind of based on their analysis of what the industry needed.
So I do have a couple comments there. You said, even if it's all impervious, they still have to have stormwater captured. They can't just let it run out in the street or whatever, and that is true. But if a significant portion of their parking lot is pervious paving, then that would obviously be taken into consideration when they were sizing their catchment basins. So you're still losing the space, and I realize it's not a one-to-one, that's not a one-to-one thing, but if it's all impervious, now you have to have larger catchment basins. Which now you can't even park there. Now it's, it's only a, nice sunny day picnic area if you want to sit down there. So, the other thing is, nowhere, when I look at these numbers, they're just minimums. They're just minimums. So if someone wants to build an office building with the number of spaces that Knightdale or Wake Forest or Archer's Lodge or Chapel Hill or Fuquay or Apex requires, we do not stop them. They are fully allowed to build that. We have the lowest minimums, the best minimums. We allow, if you go to infinity, the widest range of options for business owners to choose from or for developers to choose from. We would actually be shrinking the options, not expanding by doing this. So the idea that it fits, that, it's business friendly to require more parking, well, if there's a business that knows they don't need that parking, then it's not business friendly to them. Still at the end of the day, you're gonna end up with businesses who, while they may have fit on a parcel with the number of spaces they thought they needed, if we require more, as the minimum goes up, now they can't. So to me, raising the minimum is taking away options. It's not giving more options. And I don't think, and again, if you want to put in 20 spaces for every square foot of your building, we allow that. You can put in as many as you want. We're not, I'd love to see a maximum. I've told you that before. I'd love to see a maximum. I don't want to see Wendell paved over in parking lot. Raising the minimum so that someone can get away from the pervious parking requirements on the top end, like I said, that doesn't make any sense. You're changing the rules at the bottom so you can get away from them at the top. And I don't agree with that, so.
Said it earlier, I'll say it again. I think Commissioner Boyette and I have differing views on some of the broader conversations around parking requirements. I will say this is purely a text amendment related to the number of parking spaces, and while it can open up the whole can of worms, I think that we can start with the minimums and go from there. Happy to revisit it in the future. I really think we need to, for a variety of reasons, but I'm thinking of one big one in particular, look at moving forward on this and addressing, because this is purely the ratio portion, this isn't the maximum. Those are much broader, much larger conversations that would be tied into the UDO and water allocation and other, I mean, a variety of other things. I guess what I'm saying is I do not see the harm in following staff's recommendation, and I don't see, you have given me a lot to think about.
I can't think of the last time, short of the state fair, that I went somewhere and had trouble finding a parking space. You know, I might not be able to park on Main Street, but if I've ever wanted to go eat at the Mexican restaurant or go to, you know, Beer and Wine 101, there's somewhere for me to park down there. There's somewhere. And those businesses don't even meet these minimums. And there's nearby parking. I realize some of that is off-site. Some of that is parking lots that are basically, for all intents and purposes, public parking lots. And I think a shared public parking lot is much better than requiring each individual one to be surrounded by a horseshoe of asphalt. And so I do see the harm. I see, and I don't see the benefit, which is we're running out of parking spaces. We're definitely not running out of parking spaces.
Well, I think if it's a new development, it's a whole new world. I'm happy to revisit it, but staff made a recommendation. It's the only thing we haven't had public weigh in on. I think planning board was unanimous on this with us. I'm gonna make a motion to approve based on staff's recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion to approve staff's recommendations. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
No.
Okay, we had 3 to 2.
It'll need a second reading.
Need a second reading, that's what I was thinking. Didn't have enough. Okay. We'll move into our administrative items. Item number 6A is the scope of economic development services provided by Sanford Holzhauser Economic Development Consultants to the town of Wendell. We're going to hear from town manager.
Thank you. Okay. The strategic plan adopted by the commission sets a strategic goal to promote economic vitality through development of a vibrant downtown, economic growth, and unique character. And there's further wording in that goal to seek an appropriate mix of land uses, including development of commercial, office, and industrial uses to enhance property values, create jobs, and provide opportunities for shopping, services, and products sought by area residents. There's a specific strategic initiative and a management process for the manager to evaluate economic development consultant services. And that's why this topic is before you tonight. Also in the Department of Commerce report that was provided tonight, some of the community input also recommended that there be some form of staff effort dedicated to economic development services. So before you tonight is an agreement for the town to receive contract economic development services from Sanford Holzhauser. David Denny, a managing partner of that company, to provide services. And within that economic development agreement before you, you'll see that there's three main goals to address in doing that. The first is for staff to work with someone to help determine how best to deliver that economic development service moving forward. Whether that be in-house staff, at what point, is it just outsourcing the function, or is it some hybrid of the two? The second is to create a market-facing economic development program, something that the outside business community can see that the town is engaged and active in economic development and working with the business community that doesn't currently exist. That's for both existing companies seeking to grow, expand, or other companies looking to relocate to our community from outside. The third and final thing is to get into what the economic development function does. What's the organizational structure, what's the working policies and components that don't currently exist for the town. So looking within the scope of services to achieve that, the consultant would serve as the face and primary point of contact. Currently, the planning director and I share that responsibility. Neither of us has sufficient time, really any time, to devote to this without pulling away from other critical needs within our functions. So this provides that primary point of contact for us to work with and the business community to work with. The individual will respond to inquiries we receive from Wake County Economic Development and work those leads. That takes oftentimes a significant amount of time. It's relationship building in advance of that to work those leads. That's staff time that planning department and the town manager do not have anymore to work with the growing community. When you do have prospects that want to move to that next step, you need somebody to work with bringing them to your community and making them feel welcome and seeing the things that they need to see within that site visit. We need someone to look at our current practices and policies as evidenced by some of our conversations tonight and look at it from a business perspective and make sure that our processes are friendly and encouraging that diversified mix of use that the policy is recommending that we pursue. We don't have a firm inventory of available sites or a process to get those sites from where they are now to a point that a company looking to locate into our region would consider that site. So with available time, this person will help advance that process for the town. Having a face at the regular economic development meetings is important. Economic development is about relationship building, first and foremost. If you don't have that relationship, working relationship, it's hard for the county or others to bring them. There's not an awareness of our product in town, so we need someone dedicated to building that time and that relationship. And that gets into the branding and messaging when you do that. So within the FY 2020 budget, just approved by the commission, this money's already allocated and appropriated within the budget. So all we're asking for tonight is to do what's in the budget. The manager and the economic development consultant will work together to develop monthly work plans. The results of monthly work will be reported out to the commission. The agreement provides for $25,200 for the contract service. It allows the remaining amount to be used for any incidentals outside of the county working on behalf of the town if that contract person has to go off-site as part of a recruitment. And again, staff's recommending the use of David Denny of Sanford Holhauser. David's here tonight, and so I'd like to ask him to come forward and tell you a little bit about himself also. And while David, good, I'm glad your legs are still working at this point in the meeting. The contract would be for a one-year contract, so this is seen as a bridge and interim service level until the town gets where it needs to be. The contract would start on July 1st and would allow for 2 additional one-year periods in the contract. David Denny.
I didn't prepare anything,
Okay.
so, but.
All right. Well, tell the board a little bit about what's on your resume and your economic development experience with 30-plus years in the industry.
Well, I kind of came to economic development in a roundabout way. I worked as an executive in marketing and business development for engineering, construction, architectural firms, environmental firms for 25 years in Virginia and here in North Carolina. My first job in the professional services industry, the engineering industry, with soil and material engineers back when it was called soil and material engineers. But I found myself working on a lot of different projects that had to do with site development for economic development, and I started getting more and more into economic development and fell in love with it. So about 20 years ago, I really began to get heavily into economic development on a local level and somewhat on a regional level. And about 16 years ago, I had an opportunity to take a buyout from an engineering firm, and I had to think, okay, do I want to work for somebody else? What do I want to do? And I made the decision that I was going to start my own practice, my own consulting practice, and I worked with small localities, with some regional groups, mainly developing economic development projects, whether it be developing sites, buildings, that type of thing, or doing marketing programs for them, or doing what I'm doing here, and that is, working with localities on an interim basis, on a part-time basis, to help build a program. So I did a lot of that, and 6 years ago, I was fortunate enough to get hooked up with Stanford Holzhauser. They made me a partner, and 3 years ago, I became an equity partner with them. And what that's allowed me to do is to really get into the North Carolina market, because most of my experience was in Virginia, and that's how we actually met. I was there, was supposed to be a one-year gig, a part-time gig with the Greater Williamsburg Partnership to help establish a regional economic development organization and all the things that go with that. And I think I ended up 2 and almost 3/4 years working there on that. And so doing that type of thing really gave me a berthing in not just site location consulting, although we do that, not just product development, we certainly do that, but also just a whole gamut, a comprehensive list of services. And I look at my role, if you are so kind to ask me to do this, my role is really to be a tool and to be a resource. You've got ideas, and I think the biggest mistake a lot of localities make is trying to make their economic development program what everybody else has. And this is a unique place, and you need to make it yours, and I'm just here to help you do that, and to answer questions, pursue options, to make recommendations. And I won't use the pronoun me, I will use the pronoun we from here on out, because we are a team on this thing if we move forward. And I guess that's about all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'd just say that in my exposure working with Mr. Denny, I know that he has a wealth of knowledge in economic development that I do not have. I cannot bring to you. I think I'm pretty well versed in economic development, but that's not my specialty. Looking at the strategic initiatives of this community and the need to diversify the economy and the failure of that to happen over time, even when a markets around us are building out, that's why bringing in a consultant is necessary to help get the program to the next level. Be happy to take any questions you have on the agreement or in general.
Are there any questions?
Appreciate you being here. I read about it in the budget when we passed the budget. It was a pretty good highlight about what this piece was going to be. Thank y'all for moving this process forward. It'll be nice to have. Madam Mayor, with that, I'll make a motion to approve the contract as written.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the contract as written. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for not asking me about parking spaces. I really appreciate it.
We're not asking you about what?
Parking spaces. I really
Okay,
appreciate it.
because I was going to ask you that next.
We'll
Just
save that for
playing.
another day.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Item 6B is presentation of applications received for the Citizen Advisory Boards, and we're going to hear from Town Clerk Megan Howard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. So today's presentation is just strictly for your information. It'll be on the next agenda for action. Staff requests that the Board of Commissioners meet with applicants present in the board meeting today after the meeting is over and review the applications provided in the agenda packet. The Board of Commissioners are requested to take action by making appointments at the June 24th, 2019 Town Board meeting. So just to sum up, the communications efforts for this year's Citizen Advisory Board recruitment, I designed and printed posters that were posted in all of our elementary, middle, and high schools. Advertising was posted on the town's website, calendar, news feed, events page, and Citizen Advisory Board pages. An e-board post was created for Wendell Boulevard. An e-blast was sent out on MailChimp. Social media marketing was launched throughout the month on Facebook and Instagram. A PSA video was posted on the town's social media pages. Advertising was posted in Wendell Buzz's May newsletter. Print ads were posted in downtown businesses, 10 in total. EWTV did a promotional ad, and an article was published in the Gray Area News. Advertising designed for web and print was sent to the Wendell Falls HOA. Advertising was also posted in the Zebulon Times, and requests were sent out to WRAL, WNCN, and 96.1 BBB to advertise as a PSA. The Board of Adjustment has 7 current members with no terms expiring this year. The Parks and Rec Committee has 5 current members also with no terms expiring this year. So those are 2 boards that we won't be reviewing. The Economic Development Committee has 8 members with 3 members' terms expiring this year. Below is a list of the EDC members, which is included in your agenda packet, with the expiring terms highlighted. The applications received for these EDC vacancies are listed in the table below. The 4 applications are attachments in your agenda packet for review, and I've also printed them and put them in front of all of you. The Planning Board has 8 current members with 3 members' terms expiring. There are also 2 vacant spots for partial terms that expires in June 2020. This leaves 5 vacancies on the Planning Board. In order to comply with the state statute and the town's ordinances, an adjustment will be made to the number of ETJ and in-town members on the Planning Board. This change has occurred due to significant population growth in the town's corporate limits with marginal growth in the ETJ. Section 14.2B1 of the UDO states, the Planning Board shall consist of a total of 9 members in accordance with GS 160A-360. The total membership of the Planning Board shall be proportional to the population of residents in the town of Wendell and residents in the ETJ. After reviewing census data and Wake County revenue data to generate their projections, based on the county's recent population estimates, 18% of our jurisdiction's total population is within the ETJ. For a 9-person planning board, that requires 1.62 ETJ members, rounded up to 2, and which is 1 less than our current 3-member ETJ makeup on the planning board. This means there will be 7 in-town planning board members and 2 ETJ planning board members this year. Currently, there are 3 in-town members and 1 ETJ members whose terms are not expiring. So this leaves 4 in-town vacancies, one of which has a partial term expiring in 2020, and 1 ETJ vacancy. The applications received for these planning board vacancies are listed in the table below. The 10 applications are attached in your agenda packet for review and are also printed in front of you. Please note that we received 7 in-town applications to fill 4 in-town vacancies and 3 ETJ applications to fill 1 ETJ vacancy. The tree board has 2 partial term vacancies, 1 expiring in 2021 and 1 expiring in 2020. The list below is the tree board's current members, but there were no applications received this year for the tree board. The Appearance Commission has 6 current members with no terms expiring and 1 partial term vacancy that expires in 2020. There were no applications received for the Appearance Commission this year. And I've also attached a list of all of the different boards' attendance records for your review and making your decisions on who should be joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one quick question.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there a minimum age, I mean, on the application, there's nowhere to put how old you are. Is there a minimum age to serve on any of these boards?
No, I don't think so.
And the posters that were put in the schools, was it clear that we were looking, like, I mean, I would love to have some, I realize we're not filling Parks and Rec board this year, but I think a couple high schoolers on the Parks and Rec board would be great. Were the posters clear that it wasn't just, hey, tell your parents?
No, I didn't state just parents specifically. I put them in every office at every school. There was no age requirement listed on the posters.
Okay, awesome.
So we have a lot of people here tonight that have signed up and shown an interest, and I appreciate y'all being here, and you happen to be here on a very long meeting night. Thank you for hanging in there with us. I hope you'll stay afterwards, and I'm gonna urge the town board to do the same and have a chance to meet with everyone for a few minutes after we're finished and we're almost done. Next, item 6C is a lease of 15 3rd Street. We're going to hear from the manager again.
Okay. The item titled Downtown Public Parking and Event Space Lease of Land at 15 East 3rd Street from June G. Perry and I believe that should be Patsy K. Perry. Left off a Y in haste there. This item again goes back to the strategic plan initiative. Looking for a goal at downtown that contains that mix of uses. Specifically, there's an item that says the staff is evaluating downtown parking and event space. Staff completed that evaluation, and looking at the property before you, 15 East 3rd Street, was seen as a viable location for the following reasons. And I'll do a little bit of reading on this, understanding that there's not a PowerPoint for the public's benefit. The location is very central in downtown behind Main Street and 3rd Street. It has excellent access from adjoining streets with direct access to Main Street via Campen, as well as 3rd and Pine. Connectivity, it would provide for a good pedestrian connectivity to 3 different areas in downtown. There's existing building wall within that area that over a long-term lease like this would allow for potential adaptive reuse of the adjoining buildings to take advantage of the area. Its past use as a parking area was a consideration. There are existing utilities, as well as this lease and an easement involving the city of Raleigh would resolve a utility easement issue in this area with water and sewer available, that the town is responsible to resolve whether or not the lease exists under our merger agreement. The size of being a 1/3 of an acre less than existing building and dumpster pad on the site. But it's also adjoining an area already leased by the town from Norfolk Southern. So the 2 areas together provide for an interesting public space moving forward. And then willing ownership is also a big component when you're looking at any use, and the Perry family, thanking them again for their civic nature and good stewards with the town. Downtown parking and event space is included in the 5-year capital improvement plan for lease and utility work starting in the current year with $300,000 budgeted for potential improvements in 2022. So looking forward, this is securing the land and starting the process to get to that improvement of the parking events space in a future year. Depending on adjoining uses and what may come into the town may want to coordinate that improvement at an earlier date or later date, depending on what's happening in adjoining buildings as well. After discussion with you, the commission, staff negotiated the proposed lease for consideration. The main points in the lease, I'll have it. You're very good at knocking that pen onto the floor. The term of the lease is a 20-year lease with 2 successive 10-year terms for an annual rent of $3,600 a year. That's $300 a month. That's consistent with the park and ride lease for parking downtown currently. The term provides a lease period that exceeds the typical, if you pave a road or parking lot, you're talking about a 15 to 20-year life. So the lease is consistent with the typical life of an improvement, but allows for continued use moving forward beyond that. The use of premises allowed is for parking and event space, and the town has the authority to do those improvements to the property. The town would be accepting the property as is, which is in need of improvement. Repairs, maintenance, and utilities. Any repair or maintenance to any of the improvements on the property would be the responsibility of the town. Any utility costs would also be related to the parking event, but improvements would be the town's responsibility. The language resolves an existing utility easement issue. The owner provides an easement to the city of Raleigh for the replacement of water and sewer mains on the leased area, and that exhibit's attached to the lease. The town's responsible under the current merger agreement with the city of Raleigh to provide for easements where utilities exist without an easement. That is the case in that land. There's existing water and sewer mains on the Perry's property that do not have a public easement with them. Under the merger agreement, it's the town's responsibility to resolve that. So this does that. Raleigh is still reviewing the language of the easement language, and we'll go into that a little bit more at the end. But Raleigh has a contractor mobilized and would install the water and sewer lines within the new easement area and make the connections like they're doing elsewhere with the downtown water and sewer main replacement project. The town will add the leased area and any future improvements in property to the town's insurance policy and covering it to at least the minimal amount required under the lease of $1 million per occurrence. We have other parking areas in active recreation and use spaces, so this is no different than what we already do elsewhere around the community. There is a provision for an early termination of lease that I saw as favorable during the negotiation to the town as well. But after the first 5-year period, the owner can terminate with at least a 2-year notice the easement and lease. Examples given might be someone wants to build a valuable building on 3rd Street, so we may need to amend the lease or terminate the lease at some point in the future. There's obviously a benefit of additional building value in that, and there is a protection of the public investment on the property that would require the owner to repay the town up to $300,000 for the prorated amount of the first lease term. So as the improvements depreciate over time, the amount that they'd have to pay back the taxpayer would depreciate as well. The first year's rent's not included in the current budget that was recently adopted. So if approved, the town will pay the rent and will make the correction in the end of year budget amendment. Staff has reviewed the proposed lease language with the owner. The town attorney drafted the original boilerplate language prior to that, and then the town attorney and I reviewed that final language again end of last week, which is why it's before you. The utility easement's still under review, the wording for that. Raleigh likes a perpetual easement, so they need to work through the out clause. They understand that under our merger agreement, the town is responsible to cure this issue one way or the other, and this lease continues that requirement. That being said, if they decide tomorrow or a week from now, prior to your next meeting or some future meeting, to approve that, the town needs to be ready to sign a lease and move forward so that the water and sewer improvements can occur. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the lease that's provided. Again, I'd like to thank the Perrys for their willingness to work with the town to help address. I know this has been kind of a long-standing issue discussed in the community, and so this kind of puts out in writing the terms of that parking and event space.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for the manager?
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the lease and authorize the town manager to sign upon approval from the city of Raleigh.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the lease and authorize the manager to sign upon approval from the city of Raleigh. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor? All right, item 7A is our snapshot. Let's take a quick look at that.
I would just report I met with finance staff today and started discussing the new format
Yeah.
for the snapshot, so they're actively working to incorporate performance managers. We'll present out what that would look like to the commission at your July work session on the 2nd.
Okay.
Has staff completed working with Corpud on that comprehensive report? Or is there anything really to do?
My understanding from the presentation from Raleigh is that we'll wait an additional year and evaluate the opportunity as we get closer to the merger and see if there's an opportunity that's more favorable.
Will they come back and present that again, or?
Yeah, I believe under the agreement, they provide an annual report for the town, so
Okay.
we'll at least have, from a staff perspective, a report for you.
Okay. And we could probably remove that line then.
Will do.
Are there any other questions? Comments? Any comments about the snapshot? Right, item 7B is an update on board committees from town board members. When we hear from Commissioner Joyner about the Wendell Fire Board.
Fire board's moving along just nicely.
Right, item number 7C is a real quick update, because it's 10 o'clock, about the Wendell Farmers Market. The manager and I met about a week ago with some folks. We've actually been having conversations, or I have, with various people that are interested in being vendors at a farmer's market for a couple of months, and we've been trying to get something worked out. And things are finally coming together. Sometimes it takes a while to encourage people to do things like that, and they've all finally come around. So we had a meeting, and it looks like it's probably going to happen, but I don't want to jinx it and talk about it too much. We discussed a location downtown. We discussed, which is probably the corner of Campen and Main. We discussed registration and rules, brief rules, just mostly ones that they suggested themselves. We discussed vendors, different types, produce, meats, crafts, Department of Agriculture standards. We're looking to work with the Got to BNC folks. We discussed whether or not you could get items from other places in the state, and seafood from the Outer Banks, apples from the mountains, sand, peaches, that kind of thing. They don't have to be grown right here in Wendell. We discussed marketing and signage, and the next steps road closure permits and so forth, and it looks like the first market is proposed for Saturday, June 29th. So, if you're interested in being a vendor at the farmer's market, you can contact the town manager, and he will forward you to where you need to go. And it's going to looks like it's going to be open right now. This is all very tentative. This was all just based on about an hour conversation. Looks like it's going to be open from 9 until 1. It says here they've reached out to cooperative county extension agents to establish a meeting as well. So we're really going to try hard to do this with all the expertise that we can drum up to help us. And I think it's going to be a great little market here in Wendell. So that's that. Let's see, what's our next one? All right, now we're here for commissioners. We'll start now with Commissioner Joyner.
I would not put these people through one more minute tonight.
Commissioner Boyette?
I may have been hasty, Mayor, when I said that no business should close on a schedule. Perhaps Town Hall should adopt a hard and fast closing time.
This is my record late night, but.
That's all I have.
Commissioner Myrick?
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Commissioner Lutz?
No, we have nothing tonight.
Commissioner Carroll?
No comment, Mayor.
All right, real quick, because I'm tired too, I want to remind you, there's some things that are going to happen before we meet again. This Friday night, the American Legion Post and 148 and Boy Scout Troop 515 are going to conduct a flag retirement ceremony at 9 o'clock at the American Legion Post. It's probably still not too late if you have a flag that you'd like to submit. I recently carried my American and North Carolina flags to them, and they will take care of that for you. And if you can't get it to them, you can take it to Al White at Universal Chevrolet, and he'll take care of it for you. Eastwake High School graduation is this Saturday, Saturday, June 15th, at the Raleigh Convention Center. We're going to, on Sunday, June 16th, the Parks and Rec and Wendell Falls are going to co-host their first summer outdoor movie series at the Lakeside Pavilion. And the movie's going to be Avengers, the Infinity War. It's free to the public, so you're invited to join them there. And last Saturday, June 22nd, is Big Truck Day in Wendell, hosted by the Wendell Parks and Recreation from 11 to 2 on Campen Street. And it's going to be big fun, and bring your kids out there, and they just blow the horn all day long. And they love it. It's a lot of fun. So, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned.